Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. My wife couldn't have children, but the day she died, she gave birth. Mia had been my wife for 5 years. I never thought I'd find love while hiking, but that's how it happened. I can still remember the moment. She was sitting on a bench at a rest stop, fiddling with the frayed lace of her worn-out hiking boots. I offered to help, and after that, we walked on together. I don't even know exactly how things unfolded after that, but we fell in love, and 3 years later we got married. It was a joy for both of us, and we even had our honeymoon. I had never felt so happy in my life, at least not until we decided to have a child. That's when we found out Mia couldn't have children. The doctors diagnosed her with some kind of condition. She was infertile, and it would be impossible for us to have a child together. At first, it cast a shadow over our marriage, but after another 3 years we came to the conclusion that there was life beyond having kids. We decided to simply enjoy each other's company, just as we always had. Everything finally settled back into the familiar rhythm we had when we first met, until her first illness. Things between us had only just returned to normal, and everything was better than it had been in years. We were happy and full of life again. Then Mia got sick. I don't know what happened to her, but she was always weak, tired, and without energy. Her mood became dull, monotonous. It was as if dark clouds had gathered above her and wouldn't let the sunlight through. From then on, it was as if Mia wasn't really there with me anymore. She grew thinner and thinner, and I could see less and less awareness in her eyes. Her body had grown so weak that she could only walk with the aid of a cane. Most of the time she just sat or lay down, as if life itself had left her, or as if her soul was slowly slipping away. No one could tell us what was wrong with her. We went to countless doctors, went through endless treatments, but nothing. Either they found nothing at all, or they could only guess at what the problem might be. Mia barely spoke to me anymore, not because she couldn't, but as if she didn't want to. I even went to see Mia's parents, hoping they might know something. Perhaps she'd had similar problems as a child, or maybe it was some kind of hereditary illness. But then I learned that Mia had been adopted. Her parents had never told anyone, not even her. Their adoption agreement explicitly forbade it. That leave was a dead end too. I would have done anything to make her better, but nothing helped. For weeks I cared for her, trying every medicine, ointment, and treatment the doctor suggested, but nothing worked. In fact, Mia's condition only worsened. She became like a walking skeleton. Her whole body reduced to skin and bone. I tried to feed her, even took her in for 4 treatments to nourish her body, but it was as if she only grew thinner. She could barely shuffle along anymore, and only inside the house. Even climbing a few steps would leave her exhausted. What worried me most was her hair loss. It came out in clumps, peeling away from her scalp as if it had never truly grown there in the first place. In just a few days, her once beautiful blonde hair was marred by large, palm-sized bald patches. As much as I loved Mia, and as willing as I was to care for her for the rest of my life, I was beginning to break. We were still going from doctor to doctor. I must have called every corner of the States, asking if anyone could give me advice, a treatment, anything, to make Mia better. We traveled from place to place, and I paid, often a lot, for certain treatments, but nothing brought results. Some of the treatments felt like torture for Mia. Other times, There wasn't even the faintest sign of improvement. I was completely at a loss as to what else I could do. Time passed like this until one morning I woke to the sound of Mia coughing violently. I was instantly on my feet, rushing to her side. I dreaded what new thing might have gone wrong, and I was right to be afraid. Mia's teeth had begun to fall out, not all at once, but one by one. Sometimes we'd wake up in the morning to find one missing. Other times, she would lose one during the day. It was a horrifying sight. By then, Mia's hair had already fallen out completely. I bought her a wig so people wouldn't stare if we went anywhere, and so she could feel that she was still beautiful in my eyes. But most of the time she just sat or stood helplessly, the wig slipping into her eyes or askew on her head. She was bald now and nearly toothless. Her weight had dropped to barely 75 pounds, and her muscles had wasted away so much she could hardly hold herself upright. She looked like an old woman. At 31, my Mia looked like a 70-year-old, haggard crone. You could hardly recognize her anymore. One day, however, Mia's illness took another turn. Sores began to appear on her body. Different kinds, most of them looking as if boils had burst open. They simply appeared out of nowhere. That's when I decided we would try absolutely everything. We went to more doctors, quacks, spiritual healers. I even had a priest bless her, but nothing made any difference. Her condition was terrible. Ulcerated wounds covered her from head to toe. She could barely walk, and even moving at all seemed to take everything out of her. She had no teeth left, and all her hair was gone. The doctors were helpless. No one could tell me what was wrong. Sometimes they kept her in the hospital for a few days, but it never helped. There was no change. Then they told me the thing I had feared most. Mia wouldn't live much longer if things stayed as they were. They told me to spend as much time with her as I could. I did everything I could, but Mia was beyond saving. Her body was being torn apart. And then one morning, the moment I'd been expecting came, but not in the way I thought it would. I was downstairs having breakfast. Mia usually stayed in bed at that hour. A little later, I went up with some food for her, hoping I could coax her into eating something. I prepared a small plate of vegetables and blended them into a smoothie, thinking maybe she would manage to drink it. But when I opened our bedroom door, horror greeted me. Our bed was soaked in blood. Mia's legs were covered in it, as was the blanket. Shouting, I ripped the covers off her, demanding to know what was happening now. What I hadn't expected was the tiny baby lying between her legs. A child, a little girl. Mia had given birth to a baby girl. I don't know how I processed the whole thing. Maybe I didn't. I might have just convinced myself I had. But life went on. Mia was gone. She bled to death there in our bed. They performed an autopsy, ran countless tests and experiments on her, or God knows what else. The doctors told me she couldn't have been pregnant. There wasn't a single sign in her body that she had ever carried a child. And yet, the baby was perfectly healthy. It was as if Mia hadn't given birth in some horrific, agonizing state at all. No one could explain it to me. But one thing was certain. This child was my daughter. When Mia and I had still been planning for a child, she had said that if we had a girl, she wanted to name her Elizabeth. So from that day forward, she was Elizabeth to me. Raising a child was brutally hard, alone, with the burden and emptiness Mia had left behind. I don't think I could have done it without professional help. I saw a psychologist. I needed to talk to someone about what had happened with Mia. The beginning was incredibly hard, and the next few years were, if possible, even harder. But I loved Elizabeth. She was our child, and I knew Mia would have wanted me to raise her. I never would have thought raising a child could be so easy. Elizabeth was the perfect little angel. Of course, I had help from Mia's adoptive parents and from my own family. But Elizabeth was the kind of child every parent dreams of. She slept through the nights, almost never cried, only when there was truly something wrong. She was rarely sick, ate everything I gave her, and tantrums were completely foreign to her. The years passed. I didn't have much time to dwell on what had happened. Between work, the household, and raising Elizabeth, my days were full. When Elizabeth turned 8, I decided to make some time for myself, or rather, for my love life. I started dating a woman named Linda. Her son was in Elizabeth's class, and Linda was also a single parent. She turned out to be great company. I liked her, but that's when things started to change with Elizabeth. For those few weeks when I was seeing Linda, she hardly seemed like herself. On the days I had dates, she did everything she could to stop me from going or to keep me from leaving with Linda. It went on like that until one day she crossed a line. One evening, Linda and I went out somewhere, leaving Elizabeth and Linda's son with a babysitter. They were in the same class, and at least they could spend the time playing together. But Elizabeth didn't take it well. I later learned that she had spent the night humiliating Linda's son, telling him terrible things about what would happen to him and his mother. What finally ended things with Linda and meant Elizabeth could no longer stay at her school was an act of brutal violence. That night, while Linda and I were at an upscale restaurant, the babysitter called me, frantic and shouting. Elizabeth had mutilated Linda's son. I still don't know exactly how it happened, but she had cut off 3 of his fingers with a kitchen knife. Linda never wanted to see me again, and I was furious with Elizabeth. From that point on, I took Elizabeth to a child psychologist. A lot was determined. The specialist said Elizabeth's extreme behavior was likely due to the absence of her mother, and because she wanted to have me all to herself. Let's just say, from then on, both the psychologist and I worked on helping Elizabeth become an ordinary little girl. I transferred her to a new school where no one knew about her past, and I gave up looking for a new relationship. Elizabeth always acted strangely whenever I mentioned someone I had met or was getting to know. It was as if she wasn't herself in those moments. So I let things be. For the next several years, it was just the 2 of us again. When Elizabeth turned 12, things began to get even stranger. The resemblance between her and Mia became almost frightening. I know she was her daughter after all, but it wasn't just her looks. Her personality had become almost identical. She laughed the same way, blushed the same way when I teased her. She wore her hair the way Mia had, and its colors seemed to be turning more and more blonde. One late summer day, everything became clear. We were celebrating Elizabeth's 13th birthday. I had organized a small party for her and her friends. I grilled burgers for them in the backyard, and they swam in the pool. After the party, I was in the kitchen washing dishes when Elizabeth came up behind me and hugged me. Then she told me she was going to take a shower. As she turned away, gathering her light brown hair in her hand, I caught sight of the back of her neck. There was a mark there, like an old surgical scar. Elizabeth had never had surgery, but Mia had. She told me she'd gotten it in a bicycle accident when she was 13, an accident that nearly left her paralyzed after she fell on her neck. What was an identical scar doing on Elizabeth's neck? Just a few days ago, there had been nothing there. How had it gotten there? My thoughts were racing. I stood frozen in the kitchen as Elizabeth slowly walked away. The realization hit me like ice. Elizabeth was my child, and maybe she wasn't even Mia's. Mia, I called after her as she reached the stairs. What is all this after all these years? Elizabeth stopped slowly. She didn't turn back toward me. She just stood there, one hand on the banister, 1 foot already on the first step. Don't call me that, Jack, she said, reproachfully. I'm Elizabeth now. Story 2. My neighbors say they've known my son for years. I've never had children. How old must he be now? 8? 9? I stared at my neighbor, unsure what she was asking. She read the confusion on my face. You're a cute little guy. I saw him biking down the lane earlier. He must be old enough for grade 4 now, right? Mrs. Babbage was a bit on the older side, but I never thought she had shown signs of dementia. Not until now. I wasn't exactly sure what to say. She proceeded to stare at me, tilting her head as if I was the one misremembering. I awkwardly opened my mouth. Oh, right, my little guy. She brightened. Yes, he must be in grade 4, right? Sure. I mean, yes, he is. What a cute little guy, she said, and returned to watering her flowers. It was an odd, slightly sad moment. I wondered if her husband had seen glimmers of this too. I could only hope that this was a momentary blip and not the sign of anything Alzheimer's related. I took the rest of my groceries out of my car and entered home. I had a long day of teaching, and I just wanted to sit back, unwind, and watch something light on TV. But as soon as I took off my first shoe, I smelled it. Something burning on the stove. Something burning with lots of cheese on it. The hell? I dashed over to the kitchen and almost fell down, partially because I was wearing only one shoe, but also because there was a scrawny little boy frying crab dinner. I let out a half scream, but very quickly I composed myself into the same assertive adult who taught at a university. What? Excuse me. Who are you? What are you doing here? The boy's blonde, willow-like hair whipped around his face as he looked at me with equal surprise. Papa, what do you mean? I'm here. I'm here. He was a scared, confused child, and I couldn't quite place the bizarre inflection of his words. Do you want some KD, Papa? Have some. Have some. Was that a Russian accent? It took me a second to realize he was wearing an oversized shirt that looked just like mine. Was he wearing my clothes? I held out my palms like I would at a lecture, my standard, everyone settle down gesture, and clear my throat. I'm sorry. I don't know who you are, or what this is. The boy widened his eyes, still frightened by my intensity. He stirred the food with a wooden spoon. It's KD, Papa, your favorite, chili cheese kind. Don't you remember? His name was Dmitri, and he claimed to be my son. Apparently at some point there had been a mother, but he didn't remember much about her. He only remembered me. You've been Papa my whole life. My whole life, Papa. I tried having a sit-down conversation. In fact, I tried to have many sit-down conversations where I explained to Dmitri that that would be impossible, but it always ended with him clutching me with impassioned tears, begging me to remember him. The confusion only got worse when my mother called. How is my grandson doing? She asked. I didn't know how to reply. The conversation grew awkward and tense until eventually I clarified my whole predicament. Mom, what are you talking about? I don't have a son. I've never had a son. My mother gasped a little, then laughed and scolded me, saying I shouldn't joke around like that, because of course I've always had a son. A smart little guy who will be celebrating 9 this weekend. I hung up. I stood petrified in my own kitchen, staring at the strange, expectant Slavic child. For the next 10 minutes, all I could do was ask where his parents were, and he just continued to act frightened, like any authentic kid might, and replied with the same question, How did you forget me, Papa? My method wasn't getting me anywhere, so I decided to play along. I cleared my head with a shot of espresso. I told him my brain must have been scrambled from overworking, and I apologized for not remembering I was his father. He brightened immediately. It's okay, Papa. It's okay. He gave me a hug. You always work so hard. The tension dropped further as Dmitri finished making the noodles and served himself some. I politely declined and watched him eat, and he watched me watch him eat. So you're okay now? You're not angry? His accent was so odd. No, I said, I'm not angry. I was just a little scrambled. His eyes shimmered, looking more expectant. So we can be normal now? A wan chill trickled down my neck. I didn't really know what to say, but for whatever reason, I did not want to say, yes, we can be normal now, because this was not normal. Far from it. This child was not my son. He started playing with his food and quivered a little, like a worried mouse seeking reassurance. Everything will be fine, I eventually said. No need to stress. Enjoy your noodles. To my shock and dismay, I discovered that Dmitri also had his own room. My home office had somehow been replaced by a barren, clay-walled chamber filled with linen curtains, old wooden toys, and a simple bed. The smell of bread and earth wafted throughout. I watched him play with his blocks and spinning tops for about half an hour before he started to yawn and say he wanted to go to sleep. It was the strangest thing, tucking him in. He didn't want to switch to pajamas or anything. He just sort of hopped into his straw bed and asked me to hold his hand. Dimitri's fingers were cold, slightly clammy little things. It was very bizarre, comforting him like my own son, but it appeared to work. He softened and lay still. He didn't ask for any lullaby or bedtime story. He just wanted to hold my hand for a minute. Thank you, Papa. I'm so glad you're here. So glad you can be my Papa. Good night. I inched my way out of the room and watched him through the crack of his door. At about 9:30, he gave small, childlike snores. He had fallen asleep. Cautiously, I called Pat, my coworker with whom I shared close contact. She had the same reaction as my mother. Harlan, of course you have a son. From your marriage to Svetlana. My marriage to who? You met her in Moscow, when you were touring Europe. It was true that I had guest lectured 15 years ago. Across the UK, Germany, and Russia, I was awarded a grant for it. But I only stayed in Moscow for 3 days. I never met anyone named Svetlana. Don't be weird, Harlan. Come on. Pat's conviction was very disturbing. You and Svetlana were together for many years. We were? How many? Look, I know the divorce was hard, but you shouldn't pretend your ex-wife doesn't exist. I'm not pretending. I'm being serious. I don't remember her. Then get some sleep. I sipped on my second espresso tonight, but I have slept. I'm fine. Well, then I don't get what this joke is. Knock it off. It's creepy. I'm not joking. I'll see you tomorrow for the birthday. Birthday? Yes, your son's birthday. Jesus Christ. Good night, Harlan. Get some sleep. I didn't sleep that night. My efforts were spent scouring the filing cabinets and drawers throughout my house. I had credit card bills covering school supplies, kids' clothing shops, and costlier groceries. I even had pictures of Dimitri hung around the walls from various ages. It's like everything was conforming to this new reality. The harder I looked for clues to disprove my fatherhood, the more evidence I found confirming it. It was Dimitri who woke me up off the living room couch and said Uncle Boris was here. Uncle Boris? I peeked through the window and could see a very large blond man smiling back at me. Behind him was a gaggle of other relatives, all speaking Russian to each other. Hello, Harlan. The blond man's voice penetrated past the glass. We are here for birthday. They all looked excited and motioned to the front door. They were all wearing tunics and leggings, traditional birthday clothes or something. I was completely floored. I didn't know what to do. So I just sort of nodded and subtly slinked back into my kitchen. Dimitri came to pull at my arm. Come on, Papa. We have to let them in. I don't know any of them. Yes, you do, Papa. It's Uncle Boris. It's Uncle Boris. I yanked my hand away. It was one thing to pretend I was this kid's dad for a night. It was quite another to let a group of strangers into my house first thing in the morning. Dimitri frowned. I'll open the door. Wait, hold on. I grabbed Dimitri's shoulder. He turned away. Let go. I tried to pull him back, but then he dragged me into the living room again. Our struggle was on display for everyone outside. Boris looked at me with saucer eyes. Dimitri pulled harder, and I had no choice but to pull harder back. The boy hit his head on a table as he fell. Boris yelled something in Russian. Someone else hollered back. I heard hands trying to wrench open my door. Dimitri stopped. I said, let's just take a minute to. You're hurting me, Papa. Oi. My front door unlocked. Footsteps barreled inside. I let go of my son and watched 3 large Slavic men enter my house with stern expressions. Dimitri hid behind them. Is everything okay? Boris peered down at me through his tangle of blonde hair. Yes. Sorry, I said, struggling to find words. I'm just very confused. Confused? Why were you hitting Dimitri? The little boy pulled on his uncle's arm and whispered something into his ear. Boris's expression furrowed, but before I could speak further, a slender pair of arms pushed aside all the male figures and revealed a woman with unwavering, bloodshot eyes. Something in me knew it was her. Svetlana. She wore a draped brown sheet as a dress, with skin so pale I could practically see her sinews and bones. It's like she had some extreme form of albinism. Harlan, she said, somehow breaking my name into 3 syllables. Harlan. I've never been so instinctively afraid of a person in my life. It's like she had weaved herself out of the darkest edges of memory. I saw flashes of her holding my waist in Moscow, outside Red Square. Flashes of her lips whispering chants in the shadows of St. Basil's Cathedral. Svetlana held Dmitri's shoulder, then looked up at me. Just tell him it will be normal. Tell him everything will be normal. No, this is not happening. None of this is real. Barefoot, and still wearing the same clothes as yesterday, I bolted out the back of my house and hurtled towards my driveway before the rest of my new family could realize what was going on. I hopped into my Subaru and stepped on the gas. As I drove away from my house, I looked back into my rearview mirror, and I swear it didn't look like my house at all. I swear it looked like a thatched roof hut back at the university. I walled myself up in my study. I canceled all speaking arrangements the next week, saying I needed a few personal days. No one in my department knew I had a son. Nothing in my study indicated I had an extended Russian family. When I asked Pat about our phone conversation last night, her response was, "What conversation?" My mom said the same thing, with immense trepidation. I returned to my house the following day, and after setting foot back inside, I knew that everything had reverted back to the way it was before. No more framed pictures of Dmitri. No more alarming photo albums. And that clay-walled room where Dmitri spun tops and slept inside. It was just my home office again. To this day, I still have no clue what happened during that bizarre September weekend. But doing some of my own research, I'm starting to think I did encounter something in Moscow all those years ago. Some kind of lingering old curse, or a stray spirit. Or a Chernaya Vedma, a black witch disguised as an ordinary woman. Although I haven't seen any evil things bubble up around my place since. Every now and then I do have a conversation with Mrs. Babbage, and she seems to remember my son very well. Such a cute little guy, always waving hello. Did you know he offered me food once? I think it was Kraft dinner. Story 3. Trick-or-treating comes with rules in our town. This is our first Halloween in Oakbrook Village. Even as the first chill of September set in, I could tell something was different about the way this town celebrated. For one, the decorations were different. There were no cute inflatable decorations, despite the many families that had small children. There were also no Instagram mom decorations. No regal wreaths of autumn foliage or pumpkins painted gold. The kind of decorations here were what I call tasteful creepy. Skeletons of all kinds, witchy hats, fake graveyards. No hockey masks or fake corpses or bloody body parts. I think every house had a jack-o'-lantern, lit every night without fail. Everything from classic triangle eyes to elaborate, contorted faces of witches and werewolves and ghouls. Avery and I didn't want to stand up, so we did some jack-o'-lanterns. She did a very elaborate one with a demon on it, and I did 2 rather shitty, triangle-eyed ones, one for each side of the front door. Hers got the place of honor, at the foot of the steps. But as Halloween approached, things started to get weird. A few days before Halloween, I found 2 papers taped to my front door. I yanked them off the door and started to read. Rules for handing out candy. 1. Please be respectful and inclusive of all our trick-or-treaters. Teal candy buckets mean food allergies. Blue candy buckets mean autism. Do not hand out candy or anything else to children using a black candy bucket. 2. Never open the door for someone wearing a clown costume, child or adult. This is not a trick-or-treater. Turn off your porch light and wait until they leave. 3. If trick-or-treaters come to your door asking to take shelter in your house, only let them in if the street lights are flickering. Otherwise, do not let them in. For if you open the door and see a single child standing several feet from your door, facing away from you, close your door immediately. 5. Do not answer back door for any trick-or-treaters. 6. If you are visited by a group of 3 children, specifically dressed as a pirate, fairy, and demon, offer each child something that holds deep sentimental value to you. You can take a while to decide. They will wait. Do not hold back. You do not want to find out what happens if they deem your objects unworthy. 7. Do not approach any houses that have an unlit jack-o'-lantern. 8. Trick-or-treating begins at 5 p.m. and ends at 8 p.m. You must be present to hand out treats for the entirety of that time. There was also a complimentary list underneath for those trick-or-treating. Rules for trick-or-treaters. 1. If you have food allergies, you may use a teal candy bucket to indicate it. If you have autism, you may use a blue candy bucket to indicate it. Do not use a black candy bucket. 2. Do not wear a clown costume. If you see a child or adult wearing a clown costume on someone's porch, skip that house and tell everyone in your party to skip it as well. 3. If the street lights start flickering on and off, take shelter in the nearest house. 4. Always travel in groups. Never stray from your group. 5. Do not trick-or-treat at 18 Magnolia Avenue, the dark Victorian-style house at the end of the cul-de-sac. 6. Avoid the following costumes: pirate, fairy, and demon. There's only one group that uses these costumes, and they do not like to be copies. 7. Make sure you light at least one jack-o'-lantern for each member of your household. 8. Trick-or-treating begins at 5 p.m. and ends at 8 p.m. You must remain outside trick-or-treating for the entirety of that time. And then a third paper, which simply read, please note all residents are expected to participate in our Halloween festivities. You may choose to either trick-or-treat, no matter your age, or hand out candy. However, please be sure to abide by all rules for your group. It had to be some sort of prank. Honestly, hats off to them. This was creative and creepy. I'd rather our teenagers be playing harmless pranks like this than scrolling TikTok. You going trick-or-treating this year? I asked Avery as I came in. Yeah, Maddie and David are going with me, she said. You want me to come with you guys? Mom, she groaned. I'm 13. Okay. You'll have your phone, right? Yes. I gave her the rules lists. Did you see this? Some kind of funny prank. Avery looked them over. Oh, yeah, Maddie told me about them. They're legit. What? We're supposed to follow them. They're real. No way. Yeah, way. Was she involved? Or maybe the perpetrators were friends of Maddie's. I opened my mouth to say no way again, but Avery's expression suddenly darkened. Serious. Promise me you'll follow them, she said quietly. Seriously, promise me. Okay, I promise. I almost regretted moving here. Things were getting weird. Too weird. But I try to comfort myself by thinking about my increase in salary and how much closer we live to my boyfriend now. This was just a rocky, weird start. Things would look up from here. How wrong I was. Halloween night was cool and crisp, just as it should be. A full yellow moon hung low in the sky, and a brisk wind rattled the half-bare branches. Dried leaves skittered across the sidewalk, and the air was full of giggling excitement. Avery had left an hour ago. It was just me alone, sitting at the door with a bowl of assorted fun-sized candy. I picked out all the Milky Way midnights for myself as I did my annual watch at Hell House LLC. Ding dong. I got up, grabbed the bowl, and looked through the peephole. 3 girls in various princess get-up stared up at the door. Tulle and sparkles in green, purple, and orange. I threw the door open. Trick or treat, they shouted in unison. Oh, how sweet, I said, reaching into the bowl. What would you like? That's when I noticed 2 things. First, there was no parent with them. The closest adults were all the way out on the sidewalk, and they didn't seem like they were waiting for the girls. The second, all 3 of them were holding black candy buckets. I froze, handful of candy midair. Those rules were a joke, right? I'm not going to tell these kids. I'm not going to give them candy. That would be insane, and so mean. The 3 girls stared at me expectantly, not smiling. I coughed. I'm out of candy. Oh, real convincing. Good job. I was holding the candy bowl. I mean, I'm saving this for someone else. They stared up at me, not saying a word. Sorry. I started to close the door. As the door shut, for the tiniest moment they smiled, and I could have sworn I saw rows of razor-sharp fangs. I shut the door. My heart pounded, and I felt a little faint. I collapsed back into the chair by the door. They didn't have fangs. That's ridiculous. Or, if they did, that was part of their costume. Vampire princesses. Yeah, probably some movie. I was unnerved until the next set of trick-or-treaters came. I made sure their candy buckets weren't black, and they weren't the pirate fairy demon triad. Then I sucked in a breath and opened the door. 3 boys in superhero costumes, trailed by a normal, tired-looking mother. I sighed a breath of relief and gave them generous handfuls of candy. When I closed the door, I texted Avery. Me. Some girls came to the door with black candy buckets. I didn't give them anything. Was that rude? Are these rules really a thing? After a minute, she replied, Avery, you did good. Thumbs up emoji. This was all so weird. I sighed and sat down, fidgeting with the candy. No longer excited to watch Hell House LLC. More trick-or-treaters came to the door, and each time I was relieved to see they were normal looking. Maybe everything was fine. Maybe this was all in my head. Then Avery texted me. Avery, don't open the door for clown. I frowned. Me, I know. That's one of the rules, right? Avery, this isn't joke, Mom. I just saw him. He's next door. Coming to you next. I started texting her back. Ding dong. I stared at the door. Then I slowly scooted out of my seat. What appeared to be a fully grown man stood on my doorstep. He was decked out in a classic clown costume, but he was turned away from the door. I couldn't see his face. Only the back of his red and white onesie. The curly, plastic red hair of his wig. I stared at him through the peephole, my heart pounding in my chest. He was just standing there, not turning around, or any blip. My phone. Avery, remember to turn off the light. Right, the porch light. I leaned over and flipped the switch. The porch light's cut out. I stared at the clown on my doorstep, now not more than shadow, lit in gray and blue tones in the moonlight. He slowly began to turn around. Painted white skin, red nose, dripping red lips, and something hanging from his hand that I only noticed now that he was slightly turned. An axe. He turned his head and kept turning until his head seemed to be turned more than a normal human neck would allow. I ducked away from the door, crouched out of view. I heard footsteps. I held my breath, but then the footsteps began to recede. When I finally looked through the peephole again, he was gone. Me, he's gone. Come home right now. Avery, I can't, it's the rules. Me, then I'll come get you. Avery, don't. It's the rules. Me, I'm calling the police then. He had an axe. 3 dots appeared, but Avery didn't text me back. Screw this. I hit call. 911, what's your emergency? There's some guy in a clown costume with an axe, and my daughter is out there, and the officer interrupted me. What's your location? I gave it to her. Oak Brook Village? Yeah, I breathe. Don't open the door and turn off the porch light. What? If he comes to your door, don't open it and turn off the porch light. The blood drained out of my face. He poses no risk to the trick-or-treaters, ma'am, as long as they stay away from him, as the rules ask. I opened and closed my mouth. No sound came out. So they're true. I finally croaked. As long as you follow them, you'll be safe. And then the call disconnected. I stared at the phone, my mind blank. Me. Anything else I should know? Avery. Just follow the rules. Me. Are you sure I can't come with you? Avery. MOM don't. You can't leave early. You can't. I began to cry. Why hadn't I insisted on going with Avery? I can't stay here. I have to get her. I'll drive to her. What's going to happen? Someone's going to shoot me down or something. I have to be with her. That's my kid. As if Avery could read my mind. Another text came in. Avery, promise me, Mom. Just wait until 8. Everything will be okay. I cried harder. Ding dong. I got up and wiped my eyes, grabbed the candy bowl, and opened the door. Looked down at the three kids standing on my doorstep. Trick or treat. Wait a minute. A pirate, a fairy, a demon. I swallowed. These were the kids that wanted something of sentimental value from me, right? I looked at each of them. As a group, they looked normal. But when I looked closely at each of their faces, something was a little off. The pirate's face was too long. The fairy's eyes were too big. The demon was wearing a mask, but I could see his hands, and they were too big to be a child's. Okay, sentimental things. Do I really have to do this? Just a second, I said, and walked back into the house. I scanned the fireplace mantel. There was a photo of Avery and me up there at the fair, each of us holding a pink fluff of cotton candy. We'd gone there right after the divorce. The digital copy was lost, so it wasn't like I could print another one. I could give that to them. Would it be cheating to take a photo of it with my phone first? Damn it, I love that photo. But it was just a photo. Me. Do you think the photo of us on the mantle is sentimental enough for the three kids? Avery? I think so. I grabbed it off the mantle and walked back to the kids. I dropped in the pirate's bag and wiped at my face. Surprisingly, he immediately turned around and walked off the porch, back into the dark. I guess that meant I satisfied the request. Okay, you're next, huh? I said to the fairy with the huge eyes. She nodded. I walked back into the house, looked around. I grabbed another photo off the mantle, another one I'd lost a digital copy to. It was me holding her at the hospital, right after birth. I grabbed it and held it over the fairy's bag. She shook her head. She was no longer smiling. Okay, maybe I couldn't repeat the type of object. I walked back into the house and glanced around. What was most sentimental to me? Really? My eyes fell on the painting in the kitchen. That had been the first and only painting I'd ever won anything for. I'd submitted it to the fair when I was 18, thinking I had a promising art career ahead, that this was the start of the rest of my life. But life hadn't turned out that way, had it? I'd spent 5 years living in a rat-infested apartment in Brooklyn, eating ramen every night, churning out painting after painting, only keeping myself afloat with more erotic pieces I painted. I'd eventually close that chapter in my life and went back to school for accounting. But a tiny part of myself had always thought maybe someday I'd grab the painting off the wall. A landscape of a dreary bog and a cabin in shambles. It looked like how I felt. Right now, it didn't fit in the fairy's bag, so I dropped it at her feet. I hope that's sufficient, I whispered, staring her down. She picked up the painting and walked off the porch. So it was just the demon left. His ice blue eyes stared up at me through the mask. Does he wear the mask because he doesn't look as human as the others? After a few minutes of searching, I found something even more precious than the last two, Avery's baby blanket, the one she came home from the hospital swaddled in. I pressed it against my chest, crying, then got up and offered it to the demon child. It shook its head. I don't know what you want from me. This is probably the most precious thing I've ever owned. It shook its head again. Then it lifted its hand and pointed at me. Does it want me? Is it just going to kill me? Me? I finally asked. It shook its head, and then it spoke, a low, grating whisper, barely audible over the wind. Your daughter? No, not Avery. No! My voice cracked. I began to shout. Not Avery. You can have anything but Avery. The demon child stared up at me, then noiselessly turned and walked away. I stood there, frozen in the doorway, watching him disappear into shadows beyond the halo of the porch light. I finally found the strength to close the front door. Then I collapsed in the chair and sobbed. I don't know how long I sat there, sobbing my eyes out, but before I knew it, my phone was ringing. Avery was calling, and it was 8:01 p.m. I let out a long sigh of relief. Avery, are you okay? Are you? What? I'm standing outside, but, one of the jack-o'-lanterns isn't lit up anymore. I got up and peered out the peephole. Sure enough, I saw Avery standing at the foot of the porch steps. She's okay. Tears rolled down my cheeks. I don't understand. What does that mean? I don't know, but the rules say don't approach any houses with jack-o'-lanterns that aren't lit up. Wouldn't that only apply before 8 p.m.? I don't know. I think I should stay at Maddie's tonight. My heart dropped. Art, are you sure you're okay? Yeah, I just don't want to risk breaking the rules. So that was it. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I cried the entire time. How could I really know that Avery was okay? I'd seen her, sure. I'd heard her voice on the phone. But what if that was some sort of illusion? What if she actually wasn't safe? What if the demon child had somehow gotten her anyway? Could he take her without my permission? But at 9 the next morning, the front door creaked open and Avery walked inside. I hugged her and cried, and she pried me off her and groaned, "Mom." But for the next few weeks, I watched her like a hawk, not only to make sure she wasn't in danger, but also, what if the demon child had actually taken her? What if this was some mimic, something imitating her, and not really my daughter at all? Because Avery never tied her shoes like that before. Avery never blinked like that before, as if the sunlight hurt her eyes. Avery never filled her sketchbook with dark, spindly creatures of the woods before, never went out foraging for mushrooms, digging her pink manicured nails into damp, dark dirt, breathing in the smell of earth and decay. As the days went on, I grew more and more suspicious, a heavy weight in my gut, until one night, she cooked me dinner with some stuff she'd foraged, and I began throwing up. I halfway thought she, Asterisk, the thing that replaced her, Asterisk had poisoned me. I was wrong. You see, I was pregnant. That June, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Ava. Avery was over the moon to have a little sister. And even though it turned our plans upside down, it was the best thing to ever happen to us. Except the birth in June meant that I was pregnant on Halloween. And the demon child, it had asked for my daughter. And I'd said it could have anything, asterisk anything, asterisk other than Avery. It's the beginning of October now. We've since moved out of Oakwood Village. But I still wonder if on Halloween night, that thing will somehow find me and take what I promised. Story 4. We used to share creepy stories around a campfire. The last one I heard might have ruined my life. I wish I could have cut straight to the chase, but I feel like I should at the very least make an attempt to include some sort of context. Otherwise, what's the point? I'll try my best to keep it brief. During my college years, our core group of friends made it an annual tradition to go out camping for a few days at a time. Not very original, I know, but it was mostly just an excuse to hang out away from everyone and everything else. We weren't nature enthusiasts or anything of the sort, but it's something we didn't mind doing as a group. The roster wasn't always the same every single year. Exes would come and go. Exams or personal matters would keep some of us from joining. And sometimes trivial arguments also resulted in a few faces being a no-show. And yet, somehow, a handful of us always managed to pull through. Brenda, Michael, and Lillianne, who've been together for as long as I can remember, Dennis, Margot, and myself. It definitely became harder to schedule things once we all graduated, but we made it work. The only thing that managed to mess up our annual camping streak was the pandemic from a few years ago. And after that, it sort of became easier for people to come up with excuses for not being able to make it. We still chatted semi-regularly and hung out from time to time, but that was it. But this year was different. Either the stars aligned themselves, or maybe we'd all gotten to a point in our adult lives where we were starting to feel some serious nostalgia for simpler times that aren't that far back in the past. Even though there are days where it definitely feels like it. So the 6 of us marked down the dates on our calendars, and we made it happen. 2 days, 2 nights. Seemed simple enough, just as it used to be. We never really pre-planned any special activities, unless there was some specific point of interest near the area we're checking out or whatever. But one thing we always did was tell scary stories around the campfire on the first night. Sometimes during the second night, as well if some of us were feeling particularly inspired, whether alcohol played a part in it or not. I'll leave that to your imagination. To be honest, I don't think any of us ever really managed to truly scare anyone with our stories. Some of us, myself included, would try really hard. But more often than not, what we thought was scary turned out to be just an uneven mix of funny, illogical, and campy elements poorly strewn together. light on goosebumps, but great for laughs, which wasn't all that bad. This year was different, and as you might have guessed from the title of this post, I'm currently typing all this out due to what happened on that first night. But before I get to it, there's one more thing I need to mention. As far as I, Brenda, Michael, Lillian, and Margot were concerned, this trip had been planned with only 6 people in mind. But when Dennis finally rolled up to our meeting spot late as usual, we were all taken aback by the fact that he brought an extra person with him, someone he had never mentioned in passing to anyone, and who, by the looks of it, was apparently tagging along for the entirety of our get-together out in the woods. Her name was Liz. Now, if this had happened during our college years, I can imagine how this could have been a lot more awkward, having a random person intruding in our group and potentially ruining the solid, pre-established dynamic between us. But we're not kids anymore, and more importantly, we simply aren't as up-to-date as we used to be when it comes to each other's personal lives. Not that it's any excuse to not let the rest of us know that, oh, by the way, I'm bringing someone you've never met before, please be cool. But I think the rest of the group quickly got over it because they seldom get the opportunity to meet new people. And seeing as this is Dennis we're talking about, I think the gang just instinctively made the decision to try and make Liz feel as welcome and included as possible. Maybe I would have felt the same if it weren't for one thing. I had talked to Dennis on the phone the night before about the trip and some other pointless stuff that's not even worth bringing up. And not only did he never hint that this was person or anyone else come along, but he also sounded perfectly normal. But the Dennis we met on that day seemed a little cagey and distraught to me. Maybe he was embarrassed by the whole ordeal, to a point where he could hardly look me or anyone else in the eyes. Maybe his girlfriend, if that's what she was, had forced him to invite her against his will or something. Something about it felt weird to me, but I kept it to myself, figuring it would be in everyone's best interest, especially Dennis's, to avoid asking uncomfortable questions and stirring unnecessary drama, which is the one thing we always try to leave out of these trips. We made some small talk, a quick inventory check to make sure we weren't missing any essentials, and then proceeded to walk on foot for a couple hours or so before reaching a decent enough spot where we set up our tents right before nightfall. Here's what happened next. After getting a decent fire going and pouring ourselves a few drinks, we figured the time had come to sit down and once again take turns sharing some creepy stories. Just like we used to, I don't think everyone was particularly enthused by the idea. Maybe they felt like they had grown out of it. Still, you could tell everyone made an effort, to varying degrees, to humor one of the very few traditions that our group somehow managed to keep alive after all these years. Even if the stories turn out to be awful, maybe they could still work as an icebreaker of sorts to help us better acclimate herself to the group. Margot, who sat on my left, went first. She recounted a mildly unsettling incident that happened to a friend of hers, who was the victim of a stalker for a couple of months after their initial interactions through dating apps fell through. Last she heard, an arrest had been made, but as a story, it didn't really bring anything new to the table. Just some guy being a creep. The usual. Then came Brenda's turn, who was sitting to the left of Margot. She pretty much offered a recap of a film she thought was obscure enough for the rest of us to not pick up on. Something that prompted Michael, the hardcore horror enthusiast of the group, to lightly grill her over once she was done. I remembered a time when calling her out in a similar fashion would have made her pack her things on the spot and leave. And for a second, I worried that Michael's harmless jab might have been sufficient to ruin the mood, if not the entire weekend. To my surprise, Brenda chuckled, raised her glass of gin and tonic in the air, and said, "All right, you got me," before downing her drink, pretending like that was an actual punishment for her deception. "Why don't you go next then? Let's see what you got." "Nerd," she playfully said. Michael, who sat to my right, grinned as he straightened himself and rolled up his sleeves, as he was the type of person to never waste an opportunity to terrorize his friends, especially when he had their full attention and their consent to do so. Before he could proceed with whatever demented story he had cooked up just for the occasion, Dennis chimed in. "Actually, would you mind if she goes first?" he asked, without either looking at Michael or motioning for someone in particular, although we naturally inferred he meant Liz. She's got something she needs to share with everyone. Michael grimaced before quickly shooting back an okay, sure. But even though I could tell he was slightly bummed for having the spotlight snatched away from him, the way Dennis had worded his request definitely got Michael and everyone else's attention. Before I continued, And just to help you visualize the setting, this is how we were all seated in relation to each other. Clockwise and starting from the top, you had Liz, who sat right across from me, Dennis to her left, then Lillian, Michael, myself, Margot, and finally Brenda. No one answered. I scanned everyone's faces as best as I could. The girls were evidently terrified, while Michael was so absorbed and leaning forward that at a miracle he hadn't fallen face first into fire pit just yet. Dennis, on the other hand, barely seemed like he was there or paying any attention. The fact of the matter is, most of us were invested in her story by this point, so it's only natural that we wanted to see it through. Hell, I would have been the first to laugh my ass off if all of it had been leading up to a terrible joke, or she hit us with a to be continued before revealing to us that she's a screenwriter who's still fleshing out the story. If only. Okay, so you walked in and, Michael said, eager for Liz to continue, and completely oblivious to how unsettled his own girlfriend was by his side. Liz didn't seem to care either. I walk in, and I know deep down that nothing can prepare me for whatever's waiting for me inside. I keep on walking until I reach the entrance to the only room that seems to have a faint source of light coming from it. There aren't any doors in this house, but I don't bother peering into any of the other pitch black rooms because I know there's nothing there. The room with the light is the one where I'm awaited. I keep my eyes glued to the floor, wanting to lay facing the inevitable for as long as possible. I can't make out anything other than my feet and the old wet floorboard, but I can feel in the air that something's in there with me, maybe just out of my field of vision, waiting for me to look up and finally acknowledge it. She paused, and no one dared to make a sound. And then I looked, and before I could even begin to process what I was seeing, before I could let out a scream or react anyway, I felt my mind shatter and crumble almost immediately from whatever it was that I saw and smelled in that room. I can't really describe the scene to you. Only my primal sense of revulsion, which scrubbed off those impossibly abominable, unspeakable images from the very fabric of my being, but some traces remain. She lowered her head, looking down at her lap. If I try real hard, I can see the room and feel on some level that I know what's in there, and that I know what happened, but I can't bring myself to put into actual words. The mere thought of attempting to do so feels like the most depraved thing a normal person could ever think of doing, and it sickens me. She gently rubbed her face, but I couldn't tell whether she was actually wiping some tears. I thought she was done, but she kept going. But there's one thing I remember. One detail I can still see even now, clear as day. Everyone braced for the impact of what should be the final reveal, or twist, or whatever. Liz proceeded. Only this time with a stare that seemed strangely vacant and utterly lost in the horror she was recalling. There's a man in the room. I can see his face, and his abhorrent expression is all I need to know that he's the one responsible for whatever horrors took place inside the cabin. He's the one who caused all that impossible screaming. He's the one who made me come all the way out here for some sinister reason, and I know who he is. I recognize him. She paused again, having become slightly more agitated over the course of this last stretch of her story. I don't know if I felt sorry for her and wanted for her to just be done with it for her own sake, or if I'd grown impatient with how she seemed to just be edging us. Either way, I blurted out, "Who is it?" And she immediately shot me a piercing look. I'm not sure if this was the first time she actually looked at someone directly from the moment she began telling us her story, but something about the unrelenting intensity in her unwavering, unexpected stare made me deeply uneasy. A small gust of wind blew in, putting the dying fire out of its misery. "It's you," she said, with a voice that trembled not with fear, but with profound, venomous ire. My stomach dropped, and I felt my entire body suddenly become coated in cold sweat. "It's you," she repeated, with an increased level of repulsion that only I, the person on the receiving end of such vile and imaginary accusations, could perceive. One by one, everyone else slowly turned their heads towards me. For a moment, I genuinely thought that surely one of them was bound to break character sooner or later, and burst out laughing about how they had succeeded in both creeping me out and pranking me. But no one said a word, and I couldn't even think of anything to say as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. We just sat there in silence. Margot eventually got up and said she was going to sleep, which prompted everyone else but Liz to do the same. When Brenda asked Liz if she was okay, she said that she was. but that she'd stay put for a little longer before going into her own tent. They all just left the two of us there, without addressing me directly or commenting on Liz's dream and my own involvement in it. According to her, even without the fire between us as a light source, I could tell that her gaze was still fixed on me. The more I tried to make sense of the situation, the angrier I got, but I tried to not let it show. Why would they go through all of this trouble to make me feel like shit, and even recruit the help of someone none of us really know just to make me feel even more uncomfortable? I understand wanting to pull a prank, but this was beyond anything anyone from our group ever thought of pulling. This was on a whole other level, and I couldn't even think of what I could have possibly done to anyone that could begin to justify this twisted setup. But the absolute worst part is no one being bothered to let me in on the joke even after its punchline, and being perfectly content with leaving me in the dark, figuratively and literally, even if it meant completely destroying my disposition for the rest of the weekend. Why would they do this to me? And how could every single person in our group go along with it and with such a straight face? I was angry, yes, but also deeply hurt by the insensitivity and senselessness of it all. But I didn't say a single word. If that's what they wanted, I wouldn't be giving them the satisfaction so easily. I briefly stared back at Liz, who still sat on her end of the makeshift log benches we hastily put together, looking right back at me. She had nothing else to say, and neither did I, so I got up and went back to my own tent without saying a word. For all I know, she sat there for the entire night. I'm not sure if I actually got any sleep, because by the time I came I was still as furious as I was the night before. It was almost 10 a.m. when I checked my phone. We hadn't agreed on a set hour to wake up or anything. Usually we just allowed ourselves to sleep in for as long as we wanted. Then we'd cook breakfast or lunch, depending on the time of day, and eat the meal before carrying on with our loose schedule. I couldn't hear any kind of noise outside, which got me thinking I was probably the first person to wake up. I figured I might as well go for a morning walk in an attempt to clear my thoughts, knowing it probably wouldn't be of much help. Maybe upon my return they'd finally come clean about the whole ordeal, and even though a part of me would undoubtedly still resent them all for it, at least I wouldn't have to spend the rest of the day being pissed about it. When I unzipped my tent to step outside, my heart nearly stopped at the scene I was met with, and for the second day in a row, I was at a loss for words. Not only was everyone else already up and about, they were all just standing there with their gear and bags fully packed and ready to go. I don't know what bothered me the most. The fact that they all somehow got up, got dressed, and packed their things without me taking notice, or that they were all just standing there, silently staring me down and sort of visibly annoyed, as if they'd all been waiting for ages for me to do the same, with the exception of Liz, who stood the furthest away from my tent. Everyone else was facing my direction. "Yeah," I asked, with my head poking outside of my tent. "We're going somewhere," Michael said. "Yeah," I added, frustrated, but also hoping to elicit a similar response from any one of them. "Yes," Lily replied. "We're just waiting on you." "Cool," I said. "You can wait." I zipped up my tent and tried to gather my thoughts before actually starting to pack my things. They weren't chatting outside or making small talk of any kind for what I could hear. But I did get the feeling that they were circling me, as if wanting to ensure that I wouldn't be making a sneaky exit of some sort without them noticing. Maybe it was just my imagination, but if they were that hell-bent on keeping up the charade, so would I. It took me a few good minutes to get all my stuff together, but I didn't exactly rush it either. No one bothered to ask if I needed or wanted any help, which made everything all the more awkward, as I was the only one making any kind of noise while they just waited in silence without doing or saying anything. But I welcomed that awkwardness and did what I could to prolong it, because I wanted to make them feel as uncomfortable as I was. They didn't seem fazed, but two can play at that game, and I'm not one to quit. Once I strapped my backpack on, I slapped the side of my legs to let them know I was ready to go. Liz briefly looked in my direction, without actually meeting my eyes this time, and then she started walking. One by one, the others turned away from me and began following her steps without a word. They were probably counting on me inquiring about where we were headed or something, so I didn't. I just followed along as the last person to group, all the way at the back. It was around 10:40 a.m. when we got moving, and by noon we were still walking. Whenever I stopped to drink some water or tie my shoelaces, they would also stop seemingly in unison, regardless of the distance between myself and the rest of them. After a further 30 minutes of walking, I removed my backpack and sat down on a nearby overgrown tree stump, not giving a rat's ass as to whether everyone else would just keep on walking without me. Much to my dismay, they immediately halted their pace and turned towards me, some facing me completely, others side-eyeing me, all but Liz, who kept her back towards. I let out a small scoff, inaudible to anyone else but me, and I chuckled. I rubbed my hands together, stretched my legs, then reached into my bag for some snacks, which I ate without a single care in the world. I was delighted not by their taste, but by how much my actions were likely pissing them off to some extent. I gave no signs that I'd be getting up on my feet anytime soon to proceed with the hike, and after 10 minutes or so of me slowly stuffing my face, I was almost convinced that they just waited out in silence. But I was wrong. Brenda, the one closest to me, spoke up. "You can do that later," she said. I didn't look at her. Instead, I slowly, loudly crumpled in my hand the foil packaging of the snack bars I'd just eaten, and after putting them away somewhere in my backpack, so as to not litter the area, I brought my right hand up and cupped my ear towards her, pretending I didn't hear what she said. A long pause followed. I said, "You can do that later." "Where? When?" I asked. No answer from her or anyone. I shrugged and pulled out another protein bar, and for the first time since we left our camp, I sensed actual hostility coming from the people I thought were my friends. Before I could tear up the package, I noticed that Dennis had started walking back toward me, and I didn't realize until after the fact that my hand instinctively went for the pocket knife I kept in one of my front pockets. I was already on my feet by the time he reached me. "We have to go," he said. "Go. Fucking. Where?" I shot back, loudly enunciating each word right in his face. Brenda, Margot, Michael, and Lillian took a noticeable step towards me. I'd done my due diligence a few days prior to the trip, and looked up what sort of hiking trails and other points of interest might exist in the area, because I knew no one ever bothered to really look at those things in depth. I always did my homework more out of curiosity than anything else, because I figured it would be cool to actually have places to visit and to be the one that actually found them for the rest of us. But whatever path Liz had us walking on wasn't one I was familiar with. Even after looking at a handful of screenshots I'd saved on my phone, I still couldn't tell where we could possibly be headed. This was all no doubt part of their big prank, whatever it entailed, but I was done playing along. Whatever this was, it wasn't worth the time or the effort or the incessant gnawing sensation I had in the pit of my stomach. They took another step. "We're almost there," Dennis whispered, as his warm morning breath filled up my nostrils. "You will see." I used my tongue to dislodge some bits and pieces of the protein bars still stuck to my teeth, right before spitting the load right over Dennis' shoulder, barely missing his face. He didn't flinch or blink. "Nah," I said. I looked into his eyes and could swear that he was just about to take a swing at me. But before I could take any measures to protect myself, a sudden, loud noise completely derailed my train of thought. At first, I thought one of them had tripped over and hurt themselves as they were making their way toward me. But one quick look at the rest of the group, and I could tell they weren't the ones making that sound. That awful, distant sound of someone screaming, as if their guts were slowly being pulled out while the soles of their feet were set ablaze. Liz's story and all of its eerie details immediately flooded my mind. What the fuck? I don't know how they pulled it off, or how many more people they got to tag along. But I couldn't stand how it was making me feel. I wanted to shout at them to just turn off, but that Godolphin scream sounded so real, so desperate, and so goddamn loud that I could barely form a coherent thought. Not one of them seemed bothered or distressed by it, and I could just tell from the way my insides were doing backflips and the way my own brain was firing off all sorts of signals that what I was hearing couldn't possibly be a recording of some sort. It was real. Someone needs our help. We have to go, Margot said. I looked at her, someone I thought I knew whom I'd known for a number of years, but I didn't recognize her or any of them. Not really, not completely, not anymore. I then looked at Liz, who remained distant enough from where I stood that I couldn't quite make out her features. I'm not entirely sure what happened next, but I remember bolting in the opposite direction. I didn't even think of grabbing my backpack. I just ran out of there as fast as I could, I must have looked back a single time as soon as I took off, and I noticed that, for some strange reason, not one of them had begun pursuing me. They all just stood exactly where I'd left them. But the same thing couldn't be said for Scream, which loudly threatened to follow me to the ends of the earth. My body was on autopilot, while my brain kept thinking of the worst possible shit that could happen to me in the middle of nowhere. For some reason I couldn't find my way back. I ran until my legs almost gave out, and by that point I was nearly out of the woods. The sky was clear, my phone was still working, and I was finally starting to recognize some local landmarks. And while my ears were still loudly buzzing, the scream itself had dissipated at some point without me noticing. Despite being mentally scarred, I was physically unharmed. I reached the parking lot where we had left our cars, and after briefly inspecting everyone else's rides from the outside, especially the one that belonged to Dennis, which was also rode in, and realizing they wouldn't be providing me with any answers, I got in my car and drove home. I held my phone in my hand during the entire drive, hoping for a text message or a call from any of them that would let me know that they really did get me, but none ever came. Not a single one. I have, however, gotten calls and texts from friends and relatives. They haven't heard from them, and their respective places of employment are also inquiring about their unplanned and prolonged absence. I want to believe that they were all in on it as well for whatever reason, but I know that can't possibly be true. I've had to deal with number calls from some very concerned parents, some of which I've actually known for a number of years and met in person a few times, and there's a kind of genuine parental concern that you just can't fake. I didn't really know what to say or how to explain what had happened, so I either said something had come up and I had to leave early, or that they had decided to prolong their trip in a way that didn't really suit me. I don't think anything I said constitutes a lie, but I know how bad this looks, and I know it's only a matter of time until law enforcement gets involved. I barely slept since I got back, and say that I'm scared shitless of what might happen next to me would be an understatement. I'm sorry if this all sounds insensitive, but I know I did nothing wrong. I reread everything I wrote here a couple times, and I know for a fact that's how everything went down. I wish that whatever happened during that night didn't happen, but it did, and right now I can't afford to be worrying about anyone else but me. 6 people are gone, or at the very least, they have yet to show any signs of life. Their phones are still on for what I've been told, but no one is picking up any of the calls. When asked if I'd tried contacting them myself, I lied and said that I had, when in reality that's the last thing I want to do, because something tells me that they would pick up my calls. The exchange I had with Dennis's mother was by far the most unnerving, because when I told her about his friend Liz that he had brought along with him, she said this was the first time she was hearing that name. Furthermore, his mother actually visited him the day before. She baked some goods for him to bring for everyone, and spent the night at his place before seeing him off the next morning when he came to meet us. And never at any point was there a young woman riding his car, or mention that he'd be picking someone else along the way. I've known Dennis and his mother for a long time, and I know that they've always been pretty open with each other about most things, especially after his father passed unexpectedly from a very aggressive illness a few years ago. So who is this Liz? Where did Dennis pick her up and why? What did she want, or what did she hope to achieve, and why was I her target? I don't have the answers to those questions at this time, but my mind keeps drifting back to that weird story she told us, and for the worst possible reasons too. You see, I doze off every now and then, never enough to a point where I feel like I've actually rested for a bit, but long enough for me to find myself in some dark woods, all alone, while a distant shrill rolls over the wind and becomes clearer and louder the longer it takes for me to wake up. A black cabin with no doors on its hinges and no glass panes on its windows is the last thing I always see before I wake up. I'm terrified of what else I might hear in that dream. Terrified of the things I might see that I cannot comprehend. I lie down on my bed and think back to the last thing Dennis said to me, "You will see," and I find myself swept away by a wave of pure, abject horror, as I come to fully realize the inescapable nature of his words. It wasn't a statement, but a promise. Story 5. There's no light inside. When I was 13, I went trick-or-treating with my 2 remaining best friends, Stilly and Paul. We hadn't gone the previous year, because when we were 11, our other best friend Mark went missing. There had been some argument that night. We were supposed to be back home by 9, and Mark had wanted to keep hitting houses for more candy. Still, he would have done whatever, but Paul and I were both rule followers. We rarely got into trouble, and that included staying out past curfew. I remember asking Mark to come back with us, but he and Paul had been shit-talking each other, and he was still mad. So he flipped us a bird, made a chicken sound, and headed further away from our side of town. No one saw him again after that. They looked for months, of course. Police investigated. His folks put up flyers and went on local news shows, that kind of thing. And I got interviewed several times because I was the only one that had gotten any message from him at all. It was on my cell phone. My parents had just gotten it for me 2 months before when I was starting 6th grade, and Mark was my only friend that had one too. That Halloween I held off until 10 before planning to text him to make sure he'd gotten home. It was as I picked up the phone that it lit up with a short text from his number. I found a new house. I had no idea what he was talking about, and I texted back asking him. There was nothing. I asked if he'd made it home, but nothing else ever came back. It wasn't until the next morning that I knew something was really wrong, and I told my parents about the text. Ever since, well, everything had felt hollow. Our parents hadn't wanted us to go out on Halloween the next year, and we didn't put up much of a fight. Even this year, it was half-hearted. My mom had practically pushed me out the door, maybe thinking that getting out with my other friends again, even at Halloween, would help me get past everything. As it was, I just walked along quietly as Paul and Stilly argued about some TV show they'd been watching. We'd stopped at some houses and gotten candy, sure, but without any discussion between us. Our path had ignored some of our past haunts and pushed into neighborhoods I knew but had never visited for Halloween. Looking up at the sky, I frowned. It was getting dark, and I knew my parents wanted us back before too long. So, do you guys want to start heading back the way we? That's new. I looked at Paul, and then at where he was staring. It was a large, old house crouched at the far corner of the neighborhood we'd been apathetically looting. I raised an eyebrow at him. That house looks old as shit. Paul shrugged at me. Maybe so, but I'm telling you it wasn't their last time I came through here. Never has been. I glanced at Stilly, who mirrored Paul's shrug. I mean, I don't remember it either, Jillian. My brother's girlfriend lives down the street, and I don't ever remember something like this here. Frowning at him, I kept walking close to the house, studying it as best I could in the growing gloom. I didn't remember it either, but so what? The house hadn't sprouted up all of a sudden like a weed. It looked like it had been there for years. Maybe someone moved it here? Like, I had an uncle once that moved his house to a different county when he got mad at my grandparents. Like, had a truck move that shit. I nodded absently as I continued to stare at the house. I mean, maybe, but it's all grown up. Why would someone move it just a little bit ago and then not take care of the yard or anything? It seemed so. I trailed off as the front door opened and someone stepped outside. It was Mark. Jesus, is that you? Paul was already running toward him, and still he wasn't far behind. I was walking forward too, but more slowly. It felt like I was moving underwater. Every step slow and floaty and strange, roaring and pressuring my head and ears. I had almost reached where Paul and Stilly were hugging the other boy frantically before I realized I was crying. The fuck, man? Kidnap you? Do you need a fucking doctor or something? We can call the cops. And I reached out to touch him, but something caused me to hesitate. He was smiling at them, even laughing a little, but he wasn't answering anything, and his eyes, when they met mine, they seemed strange. Lowering my hand, I took a step back. Where have you been? His face grew serious, and he gave me a small nod. Turning, he gestured back to the partially open door he'd just come through. I've been with him. In the shadows beyond the door, I could see a shifting shape. It could have been a trick of the dark, but it looked like a patch of moving black against the black, like animated scratch marks, scribbling out a spot in reality. I felt my brain twist just looking at it, a feverish fear clawing up in my belly, trying to escape as a scream. And then the terror was gone. In my periphery, I dimly noticed Paul and Stilly doing the same, tensing up as they began to recoil or run. only to suddenly stop and relax again. Part of me knew it was wrong, that this was all wrong, but I couldn't grasp the feeling or the idea of it. It was all too soft and slippery. And then Mark was talking again. His name is Mr. Crinkle. This is his house. I could see the words in my head as he said them. Crinkle like paper, but with AK. House capitalized, just like it had been in his text 2 years before. There was a hot weight to them as they pushed into my brain. He invites you inside too. Something in me froze. I still wasn't afraid, but the sense that something was very wrong grew stronger, while the last of my ability to run or physically resist drained away. I probably looked outwardly calm as I watched Mark take Stilly by the hand and lead him into the house, closing the door behind him. But inside I was screaming. Even when they were gone, me and Paul didn't really move, didn't talk, just stood there like tombstones in the deepening shadows, waiting for our turn. My thoughts skittered around my skull, terror racing my instincts to understand and survive. Was that really Mark? It looked like him, and yes, I thought it was him, though he was different. He looked bigger and older just like the rest of us, and he was wearing clothes I'd never seen him wear before. Not a costume, maybe. Just a dark hoodie? I wasn't sure. Everything had been happening so fast. The door opened and Stilly came out, followed by Mark. At a glance, they looked the same as when they'd gone in, but that wasn't true. Stilly's face, his eyes, weren't soft and sweet and unsure anymore. And when he smiled, there was a hardness that hadn't been there before. It's great, guys. Don't worry. It's not as weird as it seems. Stilly was already reaching out to grab Paul when Mark stopped him. Not yet. It's too soon for you. I'll do it. Just watch. I tried call out to either warn Paul or plead with Mark, but nothing would come out. Mark seemed to sense it and glanced in my direction before lowering his eyes and grabbing Paul's arm. Without another word, he led him inside to the black thing that waited there. Still he stayed outside, but he didn't do his normal nervous, over-talking thing anymore. He didn't say a word, just stared at me with that nasty grin. It was the same thing when Paul came back out. I was the only one left, and when Mark crossed the yard to me, I felt my throat tighten as I tried again to speak. It was fully dark now, and his face was only dimly visible in the glow of a distant streetlight. Come on, Gil. I'll take you in and show you. You need to see it. It's really something. He flashed that same hard smile the others wore as he took my hand. Something in that moment, when he grabbed my hand, I felt the hold on me loosen just a little. Enough that I squeaked out a nonsensical question that I didn't expect. Why is it so dark in there? It sounded like a stupid, vague question that could have meant a dozen things, but somehow I knew what it meant, and so did Mark. His expression had already changed slightly when he touched my fingers, and now his face had crumpled into such a look of bleak sadness that I wanted to hug him despite my fears. With what looked like great effort, he met my eyes. Because there's no light inside, Gil. Mark glanced back at the door of the house, open and waiting like a hungry mouth, and then back to me. He gave my fingers a hard squeeze. You need to run now. You need to run and never come back here. And if you ever see this house again, anytime, anywhere, you run the other way. He let me go and took a step back. I went and asked him to come too, for us all four to escape together. But he was already shaking his head and mouthing run. Paul and Stilly were already starting to notice something was wrong, and he turned to stop them. I realized I was free of whatever was holding me now, my body already backpedaling away as Mark looked back one last time. He didn't say anything, but I still felt it in my head. Run. So I did. I ran home, and when I got there, I spent 30 minutes hysterically trying to convince my parents of a version of things they would understand and believe. I already knew nothing would help, but I still had to try, and to their credit, within an hour they had police and parents out there at the end of the street looking for our 3 boys. Different people questioned me throughout the night, and by the time the sun was coming up, my parents had carried me out there again. There were crying, glaring parents, frantic in their angry, hopeful grief. There were officers and volunteers, all wearing the same look of exhaustion and frustration. And then there were my mom and dad, who never did treat me quite the same after that. Not that I really blame any of them, because the place where the house had been was empty No building or boys. Just an empty, overgrown lot with no sign of anyone being there other than a couple of broken beer bottles at the edge of the grass. Of course it was all gone. I'd known it would be. Still I had to try, didn't I? And I had to leave out the most important parts for them to believe any of it. In that moment, with them asking so many questions, wanting to accuse me of something but not quite daring, I wanted to scream the truth at them, as terrible and impossible as it was. But I knew better. It wouldn't help anyone and would make things worse for me. So I stayed quiet. And when I was 18, I moved out and far away. I'm 33 now, and I've seen the house 5 more times. Every time I do the same thing. I stop before I get too close. I lift my hand in a small wave, greeting and farewell all in one, and then I run. Story 6. If your phone loses services and your GPS reroutes you, turn it off. Don't get me wrong. I love using GPS save anytime there's traffic or unexpected construction. But it can be dangerous if it takes you the wrong place at the wrong time, a shortcut through a bad part of the city at night, or a shortcut along a gravel road where your tire gets punctured and suddenly you're there for hours waiting for a tow, or worse. There are places we aren't meant to go. Last night, my fiancée Rav and I were on a road trip to visit family. Our trip took us through northern Appalachia, and our phone service kept cutting in and out. When we hit construction, our pace slowed to a crawl. The GPS offered a faster route, so we took it, but soon we were winding through wooded hills and lost all service. My map was still active, but no longer giving directions. It just showed the route we were on as a colored line. The sun was lower in the sky, and I couldn't zoom out to see where we were. We also hadn't seen signs for any gas stations where I could ask for directions. This, grumbled Rav, this is why you shouldn't rely on GPS. Ricardo. He only ever called me Ricardo when he was upset, a habit he borrowed from my mom. I was always Rick until I was in trouble. He also was never willing to be the one to drive. And I said, okay, well, if you want to fill my car with maps from Minnesota to Long Island, I guess we could kill some trees and go the old-fashioned route. We can just map out the route in advance and print the sections we need. Oh, so like MapQuest? Back to the technological superiority of the 90s? I snarked while we bickered. Suddenly the phone screen went out and then flickered back on. The GPS was working again. Hallelujah. I thanked the universe as it began recalculating our route, and my spirits lightened even as the sky was getting darker. Rav never lets things go, though, and was still grumbling about how I shouldn't rely on my phone, about how I should look with my own eyes and learn the roads. If you depend on GPS, you stop learning to keep track of directions. You stop noticing things like that. He suddenly sat up. Haven't we already passed these signs? I hadn't been paying enough attention to notice, and only barely caught a glimpse of the sign, the falling rocks, followed up with another sign for bears. I swear we drove by here a half hour ago, mumbled Rav. Maybe we did, I said. We were lost before. Now it's got the route, which is this way. But it's taking us further and further into the hills and away from the highway. I zoomed out and looked at the larger map. Maybe this is a shortcut to get further along ahead of the traffic. Rav fell quiet, and we put on some music. Beneath the stereo, something didn't feel quite right. It was hard for me to pinpoint. On the surface, everything was fine, and I figured maybe my uneasy feeling was because this was an unfamiliar route, and we were both crabby and tired. We'd been in the car all day. I sped up as the sun vanished behind the hills, and the sky turned fiery red. I'd fallen into zone like I always tend to do while driving long distances, when the roads are long, empty stretches, and I don't need to concentrate like in city traffic. I sort of just let instinct take over and my mind wanders. I just drove, just lazily watching my GPS and the line on the GPS marking the road. The road ran on endlessly ahead. I saw on the map where it curved. Up ahead, the road began to turn. Hey, Rick, hey, slow down. At Rav's shout, I slammed the brakes, swerving because the curve came on faster than I expected. I looked at the GPS and it was zoomed in, and when I zoomed out, it showed how tight the curve was. There'd been some lag. Rav was clinging to the handle above the door. He glared my way, and I muttered an apology and drove more carefully. I am usually a pretty reliable driver. The GPS being laggy had caught me off guard. Rav glowered and said, "That thing is going to get us killed." More long stretches of silence, and the sky deepening as the first stars became visible. There was still a fair bit of light. But even so, I turned on my headlights. I was still following the long line of the GPS when suddenly Rav was screaming, "Stop! Stop!" I hadn't seen anything in the road, but his panic sent my foot shooting to the brake, and we skidded, and I yanked the wheel to bring us into the side of the hill. He was gasping, and I looked ahead to where the road went over a bridge. It took me a moment to see clearly what Rav had seen. A few feet out, the bridge was broken. Nothing but the drop below. Rav and I got out and walked over the bridge and stepped across remnants of a barricade. It must have been set up to warn vehicles about the bridge being out, but now it was in pieces, flattened and broken. Driving at speed, you never see these shattered pieces in time. Rav's eagle eyes had saved our lives. We stepped past the broken barricade. "Careful," muttered Rav as I moved to the edge of the bridge and looked down. Cars lay piled below, and what looked like a body spilled out of one of them at the bottom of the ravine. That's why the barricade was broken. Not just one, but multiple vehicles had smashed through it. Chilled, I backed away from the drop. The pair of us picked our way back over the shattered barricade and along the road. We were almost at our vehicle when headlights blinded us. A truck barreled toward us. I grabbed Rav and flung him with me into the hillside as the scream of a horn shot past us. The truck driver laying it on, and then the wheels clacked over the broken barricade, and the horn faded out into nothingness as the truck went over. There was a horrible metallic crunching as it crashed and rolled far below. My head was bleeding from hitting a rock as we slammed into the hill, but luckily neither of us were seriously injured. We hurried into the car, strapping ourselves in and quickly pulling a three-point turn and driving away, back the way we'd come, ignoring the GPS now, ignoring its directions to turn around, recalculating route. Finally, we caught a glimpse of a sign for gas and followed until we reached the station, where we called police to report the broken bridge. While I was on the call using the gas station phone, my cell phone rebooted. Suddenly it had signal again, and now the map was showing me a totally different route, a totally normal route taking us back to the highway. Police never found a broken bridge, and my GPS never tried to take me that way again. But these days, just in case, I always plan my route in advance. Story 7. The horse god procession comes at midnight. I come bearing great news. Incredible news. A gift that one could only dream of. A family of love that you've never known before is coming to you, right to your door. In the dead of night they'll march, their bare feet stomping through mud and dirt, through bramble and thorns, through sticks and stones until they find you and set you free. It is their devotion. It is their love. The love of the horse god. He came for me at midnight. They all did. I heard the drums before I heard his mighty hooves crunching down the old dirt road. A sharp rhythmic thumping that cracked the frozen night air to grace my sleeping ears. Its beat matched my heart as I shot up in sweat and fear. THTA thump, THTA thump. My wife stirred beside me, and in her I sensed fear too. Such an inorganic sound in a place so far on the outskirts of civilization. She asked what it was, but I had no answer for her. So together we listened a moment longer. THTA thump, THTA thump. They continued through the night, unceasing and never faltering in their ethereal tempo. A horse's gallop, I remember thinking. They sounded like a horse's gallop. A gallop that was drawing closer. I was still scared at this point, my eyes not yet open to truth. So I jumped from my bed and moved out into the hall, the music of the night scoring my steps as I crept down moonlit corridors. I made it to the front window of my home and peered into the abyss, horrified by what I saw. marching down the old dirt road in the moon's cursed milk light. Their heads and bodies barely peeked above the brittle wheat fields. The procession of pale figures approached, their forms moving grotesquely to the beat of the drums they pounded. They jerked and writhed in unnatural ways, halfway between a seizure and something graceful, like a bounding deer. A dance, an ancient parade that, in that moment, I could scarcely understand. They were all nude, lathered in mud with sticks tangled in their hair. From the dull light, I could see little of their flesh otherwise, but in their bare condition, I imagined rotted cuts and infected bruises all over their hands and feet. Their faces were the worst, however, a sight that I could spy even through the darkness and the fear blurring my vision. At first I thought they were hybrids, some sick blend of man and animal, but that wasn't the case. They only wore skins. Hastily scraped pelts tugged taut over their visages, some torn crudely, so that I could still make out the human beneath. Others so perfectly preserved that it almost seemed a part of them. Several, between their dances, crawled on all fours or bounded along like a wounded hare, combined with the primal, chilling hammering of the drums. It gave them a wildness that was inhuman, otherworldly. They seemed to almost shift beneath their animal cloaks, becoming the beasts they were mocking for moments at a time as they howled and cackled with delight. T-H-A thump, T-H-A thump. Still, they were human. Beneath it all, I knew they were nothing more than flesh and bone like me. I could not say the same for the being in the middle of the pack. It towered over the others, and instead of being animalistic in form, it simply was an animal, a horse. It steadily trotted along with its dancers, an elegant stillness to it compared to the others. Its head did not stray from a determined gaze forward. Its body did not jerk or jostle, as would match the ocean of bodies around it. It simply marched on with grave purpose and strength, the sun that all the humans gravitated around. This did not mean it was normal. However, a horse's body it may have had, but it was far from the simple-minded creature of this earth. Even from so far away and only by its dark silhouette did I feel it, a numbing, washing dread that shivered through me as I stood paralyzed in that window. Its body was equine, but its movement was not. The creature marched with a gait that was not horse nor human. It had lifted a leg high at a perfect square angle, then snapped it out straight ahead, parallel to the ground. After that, it fell back to the earth, lugging its body forward as its opposite limbs followed suit. It was uncanny, nightmarish, like a vision you would only see through the lens of a dream. It was hardly anything compared to what I could see from its head. However, I could barely make out a swollen skull, long like a horse, but not narrow. It jutted out like a man's, 3 times the size of a normal one. Instead of the long run of snout from forehead to lips that a steed would usually have, its own nose bumped off its brow, then ran long down its face before jutting up at its tip like the fin of a shark. Beneath it, its lips flapped and whinnied. The corners of the mouth stretched all the way to its jawbones. Teeth glistened in the moonlight, teeth that were human but ran the entire long jaw like an alligator's. Along with them, an eye the size of a tea saucer caught my glare from its side profile. I could sense it was looking straight at me. The procession marched down the road, and finally breaking from my trance, I ducked low, peeking above the sill and trembling, though normally it would be impossible for anyone so far out and in such darkness to have spotted me behind glass. I sensed that the writhing parade had no need for such literal sight. They had already seen me in other ways. T-H-A thump, T-H-A thump. I prayed that they passed by as they continued down the street, that the group was simply a mad cult-like compound in the woods carrying out some nightly ritual in my area, and not an otherworldly abomination come to destroy us. All of this was just an occurrence I happened to witness, but no real harm would come to me or my family. That prayer was unanswered as the dancers came to a halt before my sprawling driveway, the drums drumming to an abrupt end along with them. The horse towering above them continued its haunting march until it too had reached my homestead. Then, like a soldier moving at attention, it pivoted sharply, both of its eyes now fixed squarely at my shelter. Large, piercing eyes on the front of its face. Predator eyes. I had no need to see more. I turned back into the safety of my home and ran down the hall, moving for the bedrooms. My wife waited there, clutching the side of the hallway, a look of raw terror and confusion plaguing her face. She opened her mouth to ask me what was wrong, but I spoke before she could. Wake the children. I barked, my words rickety atop the supports of my shuddering breath. We need to leave. Now! I saw by the watery glisten in her eyes. She wanted more information, but my speed told her there was no time. My fear only compounded her panic. And though I hated to see her fret, urgency was more important. As she opened the doors to my son's rooms and rattled him awake, I charged back to my bed. My heart pressed heavy against my ribs as I knelt and reached for the box hidden beneath. A gun safe with a pistol that I'd kept for ruffian burglars or feral animals that might pose a threat to my family out in the sticks. In a sense, I suppose that the latter was the case now, but I had grossly underestimated our local fauna. Within was also a flashlight, of which I snatched up two. Past the doorway as I stood, I could see my wife rallying the children in the hall. The poor boys wiped sleep from their eyes and glared at the dark air around them, as if trying to see the waves of sound from the drums that were falling on their ears. Growing louder, ever closer, th-th thump, th-th thump. Now behind it, there was a new sound that joined in, a sharp, mighty one that even overpowered the hoots and hollers from feral men and women mimicking the cries of wild beasts. Horses' hooves on the dirt driveway, rhythmic and steady. Clip-clop, clip-clop, slowly. My son's fatigue turned to fear, and my heart ached more beneath the panic. In a hurry, I reached for my beloved and beckoned them all closer, turning for the window of my room and moving to slide it open. The woods behind my home was the last place a man would want to lead his family in the dark of night. But with our front besieged, there was no other option. My wife screamed, however, as I began to slide the glass away. Something she'd seen there that I had missed on my scramble for the window's latch. Pale figures weaving from between the trees. More muck-riddled followers of the creature in my driveway, creeping and prowling out on all fours like beasts about to pounce. With dread, I unleashed the beam in my hand, casting its light through the window and scraping the trees to see just how many wicked horrors crept there. My tongue felt thick in my throat when I saw off were already skulking onto the lawn, perfectly spaced apart to cover any gap of escape. A feverish nausea overtook me as the light cast across their pelt-covered visages, only to reveal their eyes glowing in their sunken sockets, catching and reflecting the beam like a coyote might beneath headlights. There were even more that I could see glinting in the trees behind, their bodies still obscured in shadow. To the kitchen, I commanded, "Move!" There was no more option of escape at that moment. I was a fine shot, but with my hands so shaky and from such great distance, I didn't trust myself to put the lurkers down reliably. After all, I only had so many bullets, far less than the numbers of the twisted procession. Funneling them to the back door, then culling out an escape was my only bet. We moved as one, hands like iron chains gripped into one another. Each foot of our small abode felt like a mile. We had to move as the drums and hooves outside ticked down like a clock. Th-thump, th-thump, clip-clop, clip-clop. We rounded the hallway into our entry, ready to turn into the kitchen when it happened. A heavy force seemed to sit upon my shoulders, and when I blinked, I was no longer shivering in the dark of my home. I was in a field, vast and brilliant. Golden grass swaying beneath a gentle breeze, casting waves over its surface like an ocean. Beyond the steppe, far into the distance, large bronze canyons towered, like natural castles reigning over such sacred lands. The sky was blue and clear, not a cloud in sight, and the sun blazed like a hot summer. The heat rippled my vision and past the gentle warmth it offered. I felt it burning at my flesh. I turned, no longer seeing my family with me. I was alone, save for a figure standing only a stone's throw away. It was a steed, a black stallion, its shiny coat glistening with sweat beneath the sweltering sun. Its hind was turned toward me, tail flicking away flies that pestered and persisted around its skin. Several flies, too many flies. They buzzed through the air relentlessly, their humming the only sound I could hear other than the breeze and the horses eating. Its neck was dipped below the grass, buried in the plants as it munched away. The sound wasn't that of grain being plucked and then ground between teeth. However, it was wet. It was squelching. It tore with a gurgle rather than a crackle. I knew I should have felt fear, but somehow I didn't. I felt a calm tranquility washing over me in waves as I stood motionless in that field, watching the horse eat below the grass. In the distance, I swore I could hear something ringing over mountaintops, glass shattering or a faint scream, but they morphed into rolling thunder and a bird's call in my mind. In front of me, something began rising from the wheat around the horse. Human arms, as if figures were crouching beneath the grass and raising their hands in reverence. But just when they were fully stretched out, they continued, sprouting like corn stalks until their tips were level high above the stallion's back. Then they all curled in, slowly and gently. They bended at their elongated elbows and rested on the horse's back, petting its hide with a graceful motion. The dozens of limbs cascaded over each other like crashing waves, and though the horse didn't seem to notice at first, eventually its chewing stopped and it began to raise its neck through the tangle of arms. There was little I could spot, but I grasped that it didn't have the standard mane of a horse. Its hair cascaded only from the scalp, yet was long enough to billow down to its shoulders. The locks were wild and ratty, the tips of the places near the head clumped and dripping with some sort of liquid. More flies hummed around them. So many flies. Then it began to turn. Its serpentine neck curled back on itself to face me, and when the locks fell away, I could see red to the gaps in the limbs, a pale, blood-soaked face with flesh bits hanging from its lips, a face that looked disturbingly like mine. Then I was back in my home. I blinked, and the world was dark again, save for the light I had aimed at our back door. My wife's screams filled my ears, and the drums were right outside now. Th thump, th thump. A figure stood right at the glass, their filthy paw on the handle. I'd faltered too long. I raised my weapon in panic, firing a shot at the beast and shattering the glass. Screams from my family burst in my ringing ears as the man crumpled to the ground. I had struck him square in the chest, blood leaking to the filth covering him and washing it clean. A pool of the crimson began to form on the platform outside, but there was no cause to celebrate. A new vagrant immediately behind the first came rushing on all fours, a coyote pelt loosely streaming off her back. I unleashed another shattering blast in her direction, striking her shoulder and pummeling her into a limp. She made no sound like the tearing metal didn't faze her, however, and she simply continued her charge. A second shot, nailing her head, finally put a rest to her travel, her skull shattering like pottery beneath the pelt covering it. She slipped and skidded in her own blood till her head bumped my foot. My gaze snapped back to the egress, only to find more glowing orbs hovering in the beacon of my light. I was ready to take aim, but the wails behind me increased in their pitch suddenly, and I felt my arm yank back. The importance of my family turned my eyes from the threat, only to find that our chain was compromised. Opposite our link, a man with 2 raccoon pelts pulled hastily over either side of his face was on all fours with my child's sleeve in his mouth, tugging like a wolf fighting its comrade for a meat-covered femur. They'd smashed the grand window in the living room and begun pouring inside, surrounding us entirely. My son wailed in fear, and his mother cried in protest. Meanwhile, I turned to level my gun. It was too late, however. In the time my back was to our previous assailants, they'd trudge in, and I was taking the ground to bathe among the red puddle I'd made the coyote woman. What happened next was a blur. Stampedes of bare feet and calloused hands thundered through our house along with the drums outside, which by now had crescendoed into a rapid heartbeat. Men and women lost to madness gripped my clan by whatever they could and began dragging us out the same way they'd entered. I felt shattered glass lacerate my back as we were yanked through the window, but I could barely cry out over the chaos and noise. Or perhaps I did, and it got lost in the stomach-churning concoction of my family's wails and the howls of onlookers. The cool autumn air teased my hot skin as we were carried across the porch and into the driveway, closer to the drums, closer to the crowd that waited there, and closer to the moonlit abomination standing tall over it all. Thump, 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 thump. We were tossed rudely at its hooves, and all at once, the sound ceased. Drums stopped. The animalistic cries died down, and soon even the screams and whimpers of my own family were hushed out by demand of the sinister silence. I looked around in dread at the procession, all of whom were standing still and watching us intently now, all except their god, whose neck stooped down to inspect us. I felt power the closer its face came to ours. I felt fear, not the kind of fear that's often felt by our kind. The one that comes with unknown bumps in the night or the occasion mistaken silhouette in the dark. This was primal fear, an ancient understanding lost somewhere along the line of our species. One demanding respect for forces we can't possibly fathom. I knelt away from it, my head bowing to the ground as tears streamed my face. I watched them with the stone beneath my knees, as I saw my family do the same in my periphery. Whack, whump. Two meaty impacts on my side caused us to jolt, and my wife to release a squeak of shock. I turned as subtly as I could to see what had just been laid out, as to not upset the judge carefully turning me over with his all-seeing eyes. It was two corpses, the very ones that I had just put down. The first man had been passed face up, the bleeding hole in his chest creating a new fountain of blood to join my tears in the dirt. On his right, the woman, her mangled head peeking out from her pelt, which had begun slipping off her head. I startled again when the being before let out a snort. A sour huff of air through its nose that dusted my face and sent a chill through me. I felt dread for a moment that I'd angered it, but then it turned from me and took a step to the corpses, still in my peripheral. Too afraid to let my eyes meet head on, I watched the king kneel its head to the man. Its nose drew close to the hole I'd punched through his ribs. Then he began to sniff at it. A few moments passed, then its long, alligator mouth opened. A tongue unfurled from deep in its throat, and the worm-like appendage touched the skin. It began to lap and work over it, digging inside and cleaning the outside. Nobody stirred or made a sound throughout the entire process. Nobody except for me, who still shivered and wept at the might of the being only an arm's length away. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, the horse god raised its head and pulled away. The body lay motionless for a spell, as if nothing had changed. But then I heard movement. Its fingers scraped at the gravel. Then its arms began to twitch, and soon guttural, frothing noises bubbled from his throat. All at once, he erupted with motion. His body seized and spasmed, rolling over and pushing off the ground onto his fours. His limbs continued to tremble and shake, and his head shook violently no, as he rubbed a cheek to his shoulder, as if trying to scratch and itch deep in his skull. The horse god released another snort, and the once dead man attempted to move off into the crowd with the same stunted movement. It was like his body remembered what it was once like to be alive, but his brain no longer had the ability to remind it properly. He disappeared from my vision, and the horse god moved on. The process repeated with the woman. The leader of the misfit clan brushed aside her pelt with its human-like snout, then sniffed around at the split skull. I expected it to take the same cautious amount of time assessing the damage before unleashing its tongue again, but that's not what happened. The horse released a whinny so shrill and harsh that one could mistake it for a human scream of anger. Its mighty hoof stomped the ground, then dragged a line before the beast turned its body away, moving back over to us. As it left, I saw several people break the circle, scampering over the woman's body and descending on it like vultures. They grabbed at her limbs with their teeth, dragging her away as they tried to pull loose strips of flesh. My stomach churned as I saw one woman in a mountain lion shawl bury her face into the dead body's head, the spot where I'd blown access into her brain. I averted my gaze to the ground once more after that. Then we were the main focus once more, me and my beautiful family. I could still hear their heart-aching sobs next to me as they, too, tried not to meet the gaze of our host. I wanted to fight back. I wanted to stand and oppose the beast before me, but I couldn't. The gun had been wrenched from my hand as we were taken. We were horribly outnumbered, and I knew that before a being that could breathe life back into the dead, I was nothing but an ant upon the gravel. I was bleeding on. So I just sat there, sat in hope with all my might that whatever fate the fallen deity had in store for us, it contained mercy. I had been so afraid at that time, so scared after what I'd seen it decide for that dead woman, that it simply wasn't in the cards. I was wrong, though. The horse god had come to bring me mercy. It had come to bring love. Its head stooped low, staring at my youngest boy, so far away from me, like it had with the bodies. It began to sniff, long, tentative drags of cold night air that came back out in faint white ghosts. It snorted and huffed for 1 minute, then 2, my heartbeat keeping time for me as it beat rapid in my chest. Then, without any action, It moved on to the next of my kin. The same practice. The surrounding air was analyzed. All the scents and auras that he might be emitting. His tiny face cowered away from the mighty steed. But then, just like with my first, he moved on. My wife went next, and her process was the same. The god danced near her, but not even a brush or scrape was laid onto her by the steed or his followers. For a brief moment, as I trembled in the cold, I allowed myself to believe we were safe. It was foolish, I know, but nothing about this occurrence so far had ended in harm, except for the accidental thrashing I'd received when being torn through the window. That hope changed when the horse god reached me. His snout jutted from me, and I bowed low to the ground to hide my face, the sweat on my brow sticking gravel dust on my forehead. I stared at the soil, but my eyes clamped tightly shut when the being immediately differed in its rhythm. It took 2 inhales in, then 1 sharp one, and paused. It smelled something on me, something within me, something that had earned its interest. And to a creature like this, it was something that I didn't wish to have. It moved its mouth so close that I could feel its breath on my neck as it took in my scent, hot and reeking of death, like fresh roadkill. A wet crackle teased my ears as I heard its mouth begin to part. Then, like before, still covered in blood, its tongue unfurled, lingering near to my face and dragging over my cheek. If I had known at the time how much of a blessing this was, I wouldn't have dared to retch with fear and disgust. The horse god backed away from me as my heart pounded heavy, knowing that my moment of judgment must have been at hand. I watched its hooves as he stood firm before me, still as an oak. Then I watched it raise a hoof, stomp it down, and drag a line to the dirt. Once, twice, 3 times. I shut my eyes again and released a whimper, prepared to face the same fate as the corpse of the same verdict moments ago. What happened was not that, however. I heard hollers and howls like before, yes, but the steps did not come from me. I heard my family scream out as animal hordes descended on them. Horrible, vile screams. Screams that would make one weep even if they weren't the tortured wails of ones you love. I was too shocked to breathe, and my head began to turn slowly in utter denial. My peripheral barely met the bottom half of my wife as she was pinned over beside me, a body holding her down while her legs thrashed and kicked against the driveway. Before her choke gurgles could rend my heart from my chest, I saw a large, pale cheek block my view, a split of perfect human teeth running along it like a path, and a nose twisting off the muzzle. Presiding over all, however, was a small sliver I caught an eye the size of a tea saucer, bloodshot and human up until its needle-thin pupil. The horse god nuzzled my sight away from the scene and guided me back to the ground, and then its lips parted. From deep within its throat, I heard rumbles and hisses. I think I soiled myself in fear, unsure what my own fate was to be. But then I realized what the sounds were. My shivering stopped, the air stood still, and the scream and cackles around me went silent. Ancient whispers began to seep into my mind, secrets from a being that a mere man like me could not possibly have imagined, truths long lost to time, so world-shattering and life-changing that any suffering or fear I felt in that instance fizzled to dust. The horse god raised a hoof and let it hover. Then my vision switched in a flash. I was back in the field of golden wheat. The whole sky now a bright blood red beneath the setting sun. The horse that was me stood within a tall arch of hands. Pale arms like corn stalks wrapped and bound together like knotted ivy. More rose from around me, but all slithered toward their joint brothers before finding a place they belonged. They wriggled themselves into a position among the organic passage, while meanwhile on the horizon, the canyons had changed. Now, I saw upon the plateaus cities of all kinds, ancient Greek temples and Roman colosseums. There were towns of wood and straw contrasting cities of brick and mortar towering high toward the heavens. No matter how gargantuan or mighty the structures might be, they all were painted with the same fate, flame and fire, ruin and death. Each one crumbled from the cliffs and fell back into the mountains they'd been erected from, leaving nothing behind but a pillar of dust and ash. The horse standing within the arch and wearing my face smiled at me, then stood. It lifted its entire front half from the ground in a way I'd never seen an equine do. Then its arms spread wide in offering, the hooves at its limbs ends no longer hooves. They were normal human hands, The fingers spread and bent like tree branches as they sprouted lush green leaves. The breeze that filled the plains earlier was now a harsh, rushing wind. The storm that carried with it the whispers of the horse god still seeping into my ears. I let the words wash over me, bringing each piece of ancient knowledge that I couldn't attempt to even slightly comprehend the might standing before me. I had felt peace here before, but now it was pure euphoria as my whole perception was changed, and I fell to my knees and wept. I understood it now. In one small instance, I knew why the old god of the procession had come. It was out of love. It was out of necessity. It was to offer a chance to those who are worthy, that they might live the way that we are supposed to, the way we forgot. Kingdoms will rise and fall, and civilizations will come and go, but soil is forever. Earth, air, and sea always remain once cities crumble to dust. There's only one true home for all life, only one true way to live without the perils that civilization brought. We return to it, to the unknown forests and forgotten caves that we once dwelled, to the food that was once freely offered, never bought, to the community we once found in one another through our toil for survival. The horse god was offering me this escape. There was no other way to return home otherwise. No path other than the horse god. Once this truth settled, my sight cleared, and I was back in the place I once called home, kneeling before my savior. I had been cold and shivering before, but now I felt warm and safe. The people I had once known as my family were no longer screaming, and instead, I was surrounded by a new clan, a wondrous gathering of brothers and sisters that all barked, howled, and whinnied in joy at their new brother. I wept more, too overwhelmed by my joy for words. Then threw myself around the neck of the creature that had saved me. I kissed at the mane that I had once found repulsive, but that I now knew was beautiful, because it was hope, while I still hung to it. The horse god lifted me to my feet, and I stood. I looked at the road that the procession had arrived from, and elation brewed in my gut, knowing that soon I would walk the same path. There were other matters first that I sensed as my new lord lifted its head tall. It spoke so many words without uttering a sound, and I nodded in understanding, turning back to my house one more time, stepping over mangled piles of unworthy meat that soaked my feet red. I returned to the building behind us as my new brothers and sisters bent strips of wood and branches, then tied them off with woven grasses. Over the circlets, they stretched fresh, bloody skins to fashion new drums, instruments that I couldn't wait to play when our parade set out once more. In the meantime, I shed my clothes, which they caused growing more uncomfortable by the moment. I would not need them anymore, not when I would have upheld my own so very soon. I clambered back over the sill into the place I once called home, but now it's pleasant. Familiar smells hung rancid to my nostrils and seemed unnatural to what the air was supposed to be. I fought through the discomfort and went to the blaster machine resting on the desk in the corner, a computer, the last time I would use one. That is where I sit now, and why I write this message to you. Soon I will depart. In the dead of the night I'll march, my bare feet stomping through mud and dirt, through bramble and thorns, through sticks and stones until we find you and set you free. It is our devotion. It is our love, the love of the horse god. I have been allowed to share all of this with you, to tell you the great news, that soon you'll be set free, worthy or unworthy. We shall all return to where we belong, either to dust or to the wild that we crawled out from. We shall find a true home once again. It may not be tonight or the night after that, or even before the seasons change from fall to winter or winter to spring. But rest assured, someday you'll hear the drums and you will know to rejoice. The horse god procession comes at midnight, and soon we will be coming for you. Story 8. Halloween is my least favorite day of the year, because it's when he visits. I suppose you could say I abandoned him. Every year, as was tradition, I would go trick or treating with these 4 other kids who lived in the same cul-de-sac as I did. It was easy for our parents that way. I suppose our ages varied, and I didn't hang out with them much for the rest of the year, as I had just turned 14, and the rest were either 11 or 12. This was my last year going, begrudgingly trick or treating with them, and they knew it. They want to do something special for the last observance of our tradition, but I couldn't care less. By some blessing, I'd been handed a golden ticket, an invitation to the Brookers' Halloween party. The Brooker twins were the coolest kids in my high school, and their annual Halloween parties were converted. They were now seniors, and only a few freshman students ever made it in. I was now one of them. I was more than ready to head to their house, which was practically a mansion, and experience my first real party. But my mother had other plans. She heard buzz from the other neighborhood parents of how excited their children were to go trick or treating with me for the last time. She decided it was time to let her youngest, my little brother Shane, out to trick or treat for the first time. Of course, she wanted me to chaperone. I moaned and groaned and begged her to let me go to the party. She strictly forbade it, warning me that she heard talk of alcoholic prevalence at those parties. Then, she started ranting about how absent Mr. Brooker was, who was now rarely seen around town and from what I heard, was abroad for Halloween. The idea of a large, parent-free house sounded perfected to me, but was what repelled my mother. As the evening on the 31st came around, I pulled on my hastily made robot costume and was greeted at the door by Shane. Shane was only 4 and wore a bulbous pumpkin onesie. He carried a pumpkin-shaped trick or treat bucket that was nearly the same size as he was. My mother saw us off, telling me that I could stay out as late as 10, as long as Shane was okay. I was already out of earshot when she started listing off conditions. The rest of the gang were waiting for me further down the street and doted over Shane when they saw him. What followed was the usual, walking from house to house, begging for candy. I felt self-conscious of partaking in this childish ritual, while I had the wisps of a mustache growing. Thankfully, the presence of Shane eased the embarrassment, as it appeared like an older brother tasked with taking their sibling out for the night, which was exactly my situation. The gang's grand plan for the night was to egg the house of this old woman, who Parker, the ringleader of the group, seemed to particularly hate for whatever reason. We had begun down her street, not too far from the Brooker household, when I decided to peel off from the group. Shane was asleep on my shoulders at this point, giving me a solid excuse to leave. I told them I was going home, and they all remorsefully bid me a farewell. They continued bickering as I left, unaware of my ulterior motives. It was now just after 8 o'clock, giving me around an hour and a half to show my face at the party and climb the popularity ladder. Factor in the time it took to get there and back before 10. I wished I could have snuck off earlier, and maybe things would have gone differently if I had, but I had to spend time with those kids. Otherwise, they'd go home and tell their parents of my absence, and that information would quickly make its way to my mother. At least now, I had plausible deniability. The Brooker family estate lay just outside of town, a short walk from the so-called nice side. A long driveway led up through the trees, so long you didn't have a hope of seeing the house from the front gate. That was where I found myself walking up on this night, with my younger brother asleep on my shoulders. He was starting to stir. Thankfully, I really couldn't hold him much long, and I thought quietly to myself that in a few short years, I wouldn't be able to lift him up at all. Midway up the driveway, cars started to appear, decorating either side. They'd been driven here by the kids old enough to own a license. I looked at them in awe as I helped Shane back down to his feet, and he started to walk by my side once again, holding my sleeve. I felt butterflies in my stomach, not just at the excitement of my first real party, but also because I was going against my mother, which was a rare occurrence. On top of all that, there was no one here that I really knew, just some casual acquaintances. I was also one of the youngest people in attendance, apart from Shane. I bribed him with candy to say nothing to our parents, and planned to stick with him in a less occupied part of the Brooker household, which was a mansion. It loomed out from behind the pines just after a bend in the driveway. There was a fountain in the center of a pristine gravel clearing, surrounded by yet more cars. Teens were everywhere, hanging out around a massive porch. Many were smoking, letting the night breeze carry away the evidence. The whole building reminded me of a modernized antebellum plantation, and I would have assumed it was if not for that fact we were in Maine. I kept Shane close to my side as I walked up the steps to the front door. People watched as we shrugged by, and I realized I had no idea what I was in for. As soon as we passed the threshold, we were in the fray. Already drunk teens ran riot, music blared, people screamed. Immediately, Shane started to tug at my sleeve. Want to go. I awkwardly made my way through the crowd, past some very attractive women, and into the kitchen. It was quieter in there. Unopened snacks and cans were piled on the kitchen island. 3 people were hanging around, drinking and talking to each other. They turned and stared me down as I stumbled in. Hey man, what are you supposed to be dressed as? A child kidnapper, said the one dressed as Ash Williams. The other 2 laughed as I blushed. Ash stepped forward and handed me a can. Drink up, he commanded. And I did, with my younger brother in one hand and a rotating selection of alcoholic drinks in the other. I tried to make the most of my short time here. I don't remember too much of that part of the night. Thinking back on it, I became more drunk as Shane got more agitated. It was a blur of bumping into people as I walked aimlessly around the truly massive house. At times, it felt like every teen in the county was there, and all accommodated by the mansion size. I don't think I ever even saw either of the Brooker twins. Not that they'd want to be seen with someone as low on the social ladder as me. The house was too large of a party to be concentrated in any one room, and I found myself going between pockets of people. Eventually, this led me outside. It was nice to be under the night sky again, surrounded by fresh air instead of stumbling idiots. The Brookers had no real backyard, just a collection of wooden seats and picnic tables on flat earth that eventually led into the forest. There was no barrier between the trees and property, and I wonder how far into the woods their ownership extended. Either way, a group of people had begun piling kindling from the woodshed into a large pile, intent on making a bonfire. Shane seemed less anxious outside, so I decided to stick with this group. The longer the night went on, the larger the pile became, and larger too was a crowd of people around us. By 9:30, I should have started thinking about going home. Too drunk to consider the punishment I'd get if I missed my 10 p.m. window, I continued helping increase the pyre while Shane sat at one of the varnished mahogany picnic tables, eating away at his trick-or-treat candy and mine. I can remember I started talking to a girl around then, although I can't remember what about, nor would I recognize her today. We stood close to each other, our hands brushing flirtatiously as we watched the flames erupt. I was forced to take a cautious step back as the wave of heat hit me. Before long, a mountain of flame was created, and barely contained within the small ring of rocks. Teens, some as drunk as I was, some more, danced around the flames. They hollered and howled, letting the primitive impulses of their brain bubble to the surface. That was the effect bonfires tended to have, especially when experienced with large groups of people. Burnt would collapse in on itself, and the fire began to lower as the frame they sprung from was reduced to embers. I stuck to swaying, going back and forth with the girl next to me. When I could, I looked in her eyes and saw a bright orange reflection. I felt that every worry and commitment I had melted away from me and carried away in the autumn breeze as some form of smoke. Then I felt a tugging on my sleeve. I tore my hand away, agitated. Shane stood by my side, begging me to take him home. No shot. I was finally enjoying myself and wasn't about to give up my first kiss to take him back to Mother. I shook a condescending and dismissive hand in his direction and turned away. Then another tug. Shane stood there in his bulbous pumpkin costume, yanking at my cuff, trying to lead me away from the best night of the year. I took my hand away more forcefully this time, tried to nudge me away. My soon-to-be girlfriend, I hoped at that moment, was looking at me strangely. I was about to speak, however slurred it may have been, when I felt a hand grab my wrist, followed by more fucking tugging. I looked at Shane, who was starting to cry. I let out an exaggerated sigh and shoved him away. He whimpered as he fell backwards, stumbling over his own feet and losing balance. He tried to steady himself but failed and was propelled toward the bonfire. The last failure of his balance came as he tripped over the ring of stones. My eyes widened and I let out a scream, as did half a dozen or so people around me. I rushed forward, but did nothing. Shane fell backwards into the flames, which licked out to meet him. He disappeared into the heat, screaming until combustion robbed him of his voice. I stood and watched as he writhed and burned. His costume melted away and dripped down his body like wax. Soon it was him who was dripping, bits of him, falling off the bone and into the pile of charred debris. By the time partygoers arrived with buckets of water and blankets, Shane was dead, with the fire extinguished. It was I who pulled his body from the charcoal. At first, I mistook him for charcoal. His corpse looked like a dead spider, the limbs curled tight. I remember thinking to myself as I collapsed to my knees, few have a single moment they can point to being the defining moment of their lives. Some would try, saying it was the death of a spouse or a sudden diagnosis. But on their own, these events are nebulous. They're defined by your reaction to them. Because of this, it is still you at the end of the day who defines your own life. I didn't have the same privilege. The night, October 31st, 2008, irreparably destroyed my life, both what I had and what was to come. My parents were broken by what happened to their little boy, and their lives degraded. My father lost his job and soon took to alcohol. My mother did too, to a lesser extent, although her preferred coping method was just turning off. She'd sit on her bed in her room for hours at a time, not moving. Sometimes she'd be in there for days. Occasionally my dad would send me in there to give her food, when he found the courage to speak to me. Every time I did, I would see the last meal I delivered her left rotting on the floor, untouched. She was a modicum of her former self. The grief we faced was drowned out by the despair of the community. 9 children, not including Shane, were killed or went missing that Halloween night. Our cul-de-sac seemed to be the epicenter of the victims. 3 of the children I went trick-or-treating with earlier that night were among them, not my closest, but by far my oldest friends. Gone. In the same night I lost my brother and really my family, a year to the day of death. A memorial service was held in the town's chapel. It was packed to the rafters, and that was just the families of the deceased. Many more remained in the parking lot, or in the grief counseling tent manned by Gary, my Sunday school teacher. I slunk off during the service, unable to bear the eyes. People blamed me for Shane's death, and maybe they were right to do so. The weight of their judgment paralyzed me and turned me into a recluse. At the service, I spotted a boy called Rowan. He was my brother's closest friend at kindergarten, and I was attacked by memories of them playing together in my backyard. That was too much, and I rushed out of the chapel to a chorus of murmurs and spiteful glances. I wandered for a bit, away from the chapel and the busy streets. Eventually, I crossed over the small park, past the gazebo, and on toward the woods. They were a place of solace to me since I was a child, and now I felt them calling to me again. I passed the ferny threshold and entered the forest. The pine trees all stood firm, and I knew they'd be here longer than I would. After a while of aimless walking, I sat on a log and put my head in my hands. There was nothing I could do but weep. This Halloween was sterile. There were no decorations out, no pumpkins carved, and certainly no children allowed out to trick or treat. In my slump, I blamed myself for robbing the town of this holiday. As I wallowed, I heard something, the cracking of twigs. I turned and saw death. Shane was standing just a few yards in front of me. He was damaged, but I would never forget his face, especially not the variant I saw screaming back at me from within the flames. The pumpkin costume had melted and was clinging to his charred body. Blackened bone was visible between gaps of cooked flesh, and I realized the snapping sound that accompanied his walk came from his fused joints grinding and not anything underfoot. A steady trail of smoke rose from his nose and the corners of his mouth, which was bent like a horseshoe down into a miserable grimace. I got on my feet, but could move no more. Fear and regret washed over me as I watched my brother near. "I'm sorry," I choked out. The words burned as I said them, and they seemed to have no effect on Shane. I could smell him now. It was the smell of sour grease, and it made me gag. Finally, I regained control of my body and took a step back as he entered touching distance. His eyes, once a light blue, were the first things to fizzle and pop as he was engulfed in the fire. Now his scab-covered sockets were filled with embers, which shone in the shadow of the pines. I let out a defeated whimper as I stared into them. Knowing I couldn't confront him now, I turned and ran. I didn't look back as I crashed through the forest, eventually bursting out into the park. I ran past a gazebo and didn't stop running until my lungs gave out. I stopped at the road and started to make my way up the inclining sidewalk that led into Main Street between pans. I realized I could hear something off in the distance. Sirens. I looked up to see a flash of red go by near the end of the street. It was a fire engine heading towards a chapel. Apparently, it was a fault in the electrics. It could have been prevented, easily, if only they had the money to replace the wiring that had been there since the 70s. It was a matter of when, not if, the newsreader said. The real tragedy was that it finally did happen while so many people were gathered inside the building. The fire claimed the lives of 8 people. Although we should be thankful it wasn't more, they all said. 2 of those 8 people were my parents. It was my mother's first time out of the house since Shane's funeral, which she demanded be an open casket. In the span of a year, I was now left with no close family, and I knew why. It was punishment, divine or cosmic, for what I had done that Halloween night. Soon after losing my parents, I was sent to live with my aunt and uncle who lived upstate among the pines. For a while, tragedy ended here. I was cared for and quickly made friends at the small, remote school I now attended. Every Halloween, however, I'd see him, usually a glimpse from a window, where I'd spot him off in the forest, watching the house. One year, I decided to not look outside at any point during the day of the 31st. On this occasion, he appeared in the corner of my room. I simply rolled over in bed and held my breath until the smell of an unclean grease trap disappeared. 2010 was the hardest, as I was convinced he'd burned down my new home. That never happened, and I was granted solace, apart from the annual appearance, for the next decade and a half. In that time, I went to college and fell in love, as so many do. Her name was Amy, and we were married by 2016 and parents by 2018. Family life was a comfort for me, a sense of normality that was absent throughout my teens. I raised my son well, I like to think, although he was quite sheltered. I forbid him from trick or treating, although the COVID pandemic helped enforce that rule. My son's uncle would still appear to me. Like clockwork, I'd spend the day racked with guilt and anticipation for Shane's appearance. He always arrived, even just in the corner of my eye. No one else ever saw him, judging from the reaction to his appearance at a Halloween party last year, or the lack thereof. I wasn't used to seeing him. I knew I never would be, but my eyes tended to glaze over when I saw him. It wasn't a shock anymore, just a horrifying fact. I hadn't spoken a word to him since 2009, but decided this was a year. Halloween 2025. I would confront my personal demon, and where better to do so than in my hometown. I was surfing the web a few weeks ago, and saw that my old home was now a B&B. On a whim, I decided to book a stay for the Halloween weekend. My wife was surprisingly thrilled, as I had always been reluctant to talk about my life before I met her. She received snippets, and knew the gist of what had happened to my family. She could always tell how raw the wound was, and didn't push me too far. This trip, I decided I would tell all. We packed our things, just enough for a 5-day stay, and headed north. It was a 3-hour drive from my new life, but it felt much longer. Mentally, too, my hometown had been the furthest thing from my mind since I left it, not by choice, but by the active suppression of my connection to it, other than one or two. I really couldn't remember anyone who might still be living there. It was afternoon by the time we drove past the erroneous sign displaying the town's name and population, with welcome and come back soon written on opposing sides. We finally cleared the pines, which had been on either side of the road for much of the journey, and began to pass houses. As I drove, I realized just how little the place had changed. It was a little more run down, sure, but other than that it felt like it had been preserved, untouched. I didn't notice a single new building that wasn't around when I was a teen. I drove past suburban rows of houses, and eventually turned into a familiar street. My former house was right at the end of the cul-de-sac, built further back than the rest of the road, breaking the pattern. The paint was new, and a sign hung above the door, letting people know it was now a B&B rather than a residential building like the ones around it. I helped Amy heave luggage in the trunk, while my son excitedly ran around the finely trimmed yard. With a strange feeling I can't quite describe, possibly a mix of nostalgia and disgrace, I made my way up the path and onto the white porch. I entered with the ring of a bell and was greeted by a fragile old woman who sat behind a makeshift desk. I told her who I was as she showed us to our rooms. She became enthralled with emotion and let me have a private tour around the entire house. Not all that much of the layout had changed, apart from conversion of a dining room and office into yet more bedrooms. The decorations were foreign, but I found I could still traverse the building with my eyes closed. The old widow, Mavis, retired back to her room once we were settled in. All three of us were in the same room, me sharing a bed with Amy while my son had one to his own. It was nice, quaint. The whole place smelled like linen. I lied there for a while and remembered creaking open the door and seeing the husk of my mother sitting in here, between piles of molding plates and clothes wet with tears. The next day was spent doing a little walking tour of the town, acting as a guide as I told my wife and son about the places we passed. It was a fun day out, and I got to relive a few of my happier memories from childhood, scarce as they may be. In the evening, we ate with Mavis, who told us her life story. It was her husband's dream of running this place, and he died of an aneurysm just weeks after opening. There was no sign of grief in the old woman's eyes or tone as she spoke. It wasn't that she was cold and heartless. She had just grown to accept the hand she'd been dealt. She gave me hope. The next day, Halloween, I went for a walk on my own. I was hoping Shane would appear while I was out, so I could finally talk to him in full. For much of the day, I walked the streets, which were covered in Halloween decorations. Every house I passed seemed to have been invaded by jack-o'-lanterns. The effort the town put into Halloween seemed to dwarf what it had been when I was a child. The place had clearly moved on from the stigma that surrounded the holiday. Why couldn't I? It was getting late now, and still no sign of Shane. I even spent some time walking by the forest's edge, although I never found the courage to enter the green darkness. It was finally time to get back to my family, I thought to myself, and that's when I saw it, rising in the distance. Smoke. The smoke was accompanied by an orange glow. Sirens blared as I ran, terrified, towards the source. As I did, sprinting across roads and through alleys, I realized the fire was too close to possibly be my house. I finally emerged into the effect street, where a fire engine had already arrived, along with a cop car. One of the many stores was engulfed in flames, and beginning to collapse in on itself. The place was called Largo's Novelties, a costume and mask store that became insanely popular around Halloween. It was a store vital to my childhood, and I felt a strange sense of symbolism watching it smolder. Crowds of would-be customers stood outside, some dressed in its wares. Thankfully, firemen were already bringing the fire under control, and it looked as though much of the dull, unassuming location would be saved, apart from the roof. A cop waved me away, and I began to walk back to the B&B, deeply relieved. I arrived before dark, passing countless trick-or-treaters as I walked. My family had eaten, and I found them reading in our room. I grabbed dinner earlier at the small Vietnamese restaurant that I'm overjoyed was still open. Amy told me that they'd gone to the park earlier, and that she spotted me off in the distance by the trees, although I didn't respond to her shouts. She then asked if anything was on my mind, and how I was dealing with being back. I gave my son his headphones and let him play some game on my tablet while I talked to his mother in private, or as much privacy as could be found in a single room. Once I was certain he was distracted, I opened up. I told Amy, the first time in our marriage, that it was me who was responsible for my brother's death. I told her that my parents died because of me too, in a less direct way. I told her how I saw Shane every year since on Halloween, and came back here for this trip to try and finally talk to him. Her face cycled through a series of emotions, from shock to horror, then to something akin to understanding. She comforted me as I began to cry. Although I noticed her embrace felt cautious, reserved, she whispered to me that I didn't need to hide these things from her, and I told her I knew. My son noticed my distress and left the tablet where it was, jumping onto our bed and throwing his arms around me. We decided to have an early night that night, as we were all tired. I fell asleep happy to not have seen Shane for the first Halloween since he died. I awoke to the smell of smoke, which I had become intimately acquainted with. I slowly sat up and swung my legs out of bed, expecting to see my forever little brother standing in the corner of the room. When no orange glow caught my eye, I switched the bedside lamp on, making my wife stir. The room, now lit, was clearly only occupied by us three. I decided to journey to the toilet while I was up and switched the lamp off. As had been when I was a boy, there was only one bathroom in the house, which was downstairs. I left my room and was immediately hit by a waft of smoke. Fire crackled on the first floor, and I ran back to my family, coughing and spluttering. They were awoken by the sounds of my struggle to breathe. I hastily explained the situation and told them we had to flee. They both tried to grab a bag or needed possession, but I knew there was no time. I took my wife by the wrist and my son by the hand and fled. We burst out of the room and into the smoke-filled hallway. I crouched low, just short crawling, and made sure my family did the same. We collectively ran down the stairs and into where the fire had taken hold. Thankfully, it seemed to mostly be relegated to the kitchen. There was a clear, flameless path to the front door, and although the heat was still oppressive, I held my wife and son close as we bolted outside. The night was cold, giving a strange contrast. Mavis stood in her garden, being attended by a young woman. She was muttering to herself about not replacing the smoke alarms in a cadence that felt depressively senile. Another neighbor, a middle-aged man, stood near them talking on the phone. I gathered he was calling 911 and felt a wave of relief wash over me. Where is he? My wife barely choked out the words through tears. I had never seen her so frightened. Who? I began, then trailed off. I looked down at my side. I was holding the hand of a young boy. The skin was peeling and charred, as was the rest of him. The fabric of a pumpkin costume had been heated to the point it fused with the flesh. Two embers squinted at me, accompanied by a lipless smile. Quickly, Shane faded into ashen dust, which was carried off by the wind along with swirling leaves of yellow and red. I looked back at my wife. Both of us stared at each other, our mouths opening and closing, consumed by devastation as we processed our situation. It hit us soon as we heard his voice. We both turned quicker than was thought possible and saw our son screaming in terror from the right, upstairs bedroom. Immediately, our parental senses forced us to abandon our better judgment, and we both headed back to the front door. The same man who'd been on the phone, shouted and tried to stop us from diving headfirst into our deaths. Clearly, he wasn't a parent. The man ran after us and grabbed Amy just before she could follow me into the burning building. I heard the door slam shut behind me and knew it was some other force that had driven it closed. The flames now engulfed the lounge and licked at the base of the stairs. I lifted the collar of my night shirt up past my nose, although it gave me little protection. My forearm sizzled against a heated brass knob that adorned the end of the staircase's banister. I ignored the pain and rushed up to the blanket of smoke, which hung above me like clouds on a stormy day. I reached the second story and burst into our room, which had once been my mother's room and could well soon be my final resting place. The room was crowded. I fell to my hands and knees to escape asphyxiation and gazed up at almost a dozen children. Most were dressed in a Halloween costume, one in a skin-tight Spider-Man suit, another, who had a large head wound, was a wolf man. All had glowing eyes like a candle flicker. Among them was the gang. My group of friends I spent the first half of that fateful night trick or treating with. Olivia in her homemade robot costume that consists of egg cartons and foil, and David, who was the creature from the Black Lagoon. Zach wore a snake charmer outfit, which was really just an excuse for him to play his clarinet in public. Parker was the lucky one of the bunch, who survived. The fact that he wasn't here made me realize what connected the children in this room. They were the ones who died on October 30th, 2008. In the center of this group was the burning figure of my younger brother. Next to him was my son, who, almost 7 years ago when he was born, I named Shane. I watched him now, frightened and surrounded, clutching the hand of my little brother. Please, I pleaded, my voice muffled. Let him go. You're not supposed to be here, my little brother began. Smoke bellowed from his mouth as he spoke, which swirled and gathered at the ceiling with the rest. They were the first words we'd spoken in over a decade. I know, I said, coughing. I can leave. Just let me bring my son. You're not supposed to be here. my brother repeated, his voice a low and unnatural mockery of how he used the sound. You died 17 years ago tonight. No, I gagged, you did. My younger brother shook his head slowly, flakes of burnt skin falling to his neck as he did. Then he spoke for a final time. Join us, it said, and held out its hand. My terrified son, Shane, screamed then and tore me from the conversation. I ran to my feet and grabbed him, a clear plan in my head. I dragged him to the window, which only opened wide enough for a small gap. I called out for anyone, to catch my son. I watched as Amy positioned herself under the window, along with a concerned man. A crowd of neighbors soon gathered, and I saw the lights of fire engine draw near. I lifted Shane to the gap, holding him close. I told him to trust me and, for the last time, told him that I loved him. Then I let go. I watched as he fell into the arms of his mother, who was held up by the crowd. I fell backward, the smoke unbearably tearing at my eyes. I looked up and saw that I was still surrounded. Michael, the apparitions of my childhood friend began to chant as one. Michael, Michael. I rolled over onto my stomach and took out my phone. I began writing this while sat on a park bench waiting for my brother to appear earlier today. It began as a way to collect my thoughts and to process what I could say. It now ends as my final message to my wife and child. A goodbye, typed as my lungs fill with poison. Even if my phone melts with the rest of me, I hope someone online makes sure this finds its way to them. Amy, you are the love of my life. When I first met you, I couldn't imagine spending my years with anyone else. You hold half of my heart, and that's how I know I'll live on. My final thoughts were of you and Shane, and that's what made death bearable. Shane, you will never know how much I love you. My only regret with life was that I couldn't spend more of it with you. Never forget me, and remember to cherish the memories you have of your father. They can never leave you. Memories never do. Story 9. Some haunted houses know exactly what you're scared of, and they don't end when you walk out. This is something I don't like to talk about. For the past year, I've tried the hardest I possibly could to bury these events in the furthest cavern of my mind, because I've been scared if I tried to truly process them, something in me would break and not be able to be unbroken. But it's Halloween again, and I think it's time. I think it's time I face it. My neighbors had always been sort of reclusive. They certainly weren't unfriendly, or at least I didn't think they were based on a few times we interacted, but they were quiet, private people. There were certain things about them that made me think they had much more to them than I would ever know about. I hardly ever saw them outside during the day, but at night all the lights would be on, for example, and their curtains were always drawn. The main thing that made me feel this way, though, was what they did on Halloween. Every single Halloween, without fail, they had a haunted house. Not one of those huge publicly advertised ones with paid admission at the door, although it did seem very thought out. It was free and homemade, but over the years news spread like wildfire, and soon every time there were floods of people coming in and out. Some of them even waited outside before it was open, before it even got dark out. The kids from the surrounding neighborhoods loved it the most. Last year, there was a man standing outside the gate to stop people from going in too early. I wasn't sure who he was, because he wore a ghoulish mask over his face, but he was tall and stood perfectly still as the kids tried to get him to react. They teased him, bribed him, but he wouldn't move, but periodically he would jump out at them, and they would all scream and giggle and scatter into the street. I saw this happening on my way back from the store. The sun was setting over the horizon, dusting all the houses in an eerie shade of gold that never looked the same any other night of the year. And I remember I had severely put off getting Halloween candy until the last second. The shelves had been nearly picked clean by the time I got there. You've never been? Amy asked, toying with her mask. It made her too sweaty to keep it on, but she refused to abandon it, as it was part of her costume. We were all past the point where dressing up was considered embarrassing, and at the age now where it had cycled back around to seriously committing to the holiday. She was dressed as a yellow Power Ranger, and all night we had been teasing her about it. Put on some real clothes. One of us would say, "Girls only dress slutty on Halloween." so shameful. And she would glare and say, "Do you see even an inch of my skin right now? Keep it in your pants." Nope, never. I dumped mini Snickers into an orange pumpkin-shaped bowl. Never really had time for it, and it's always so crowded over there. She shoved a spare lollipop she'd found into her mouth and grinned. "We have time before the party." "No, we don't," Jason called from the bathroom, poking his head around the corner to stare her down. He had an eye patch on, and he was scrunching gel into his brown hair. "Avery will fucking murder me if we're late." I said I'd help make the punch. Amy rolled her eyes. "It takes 2 seconds to make punch. You just pour a bunch of shit in a bowl. Clearly you don't understand the artistry of making a good punch." "I'm with Amy," Seth muttered from the couch where he was reclining, his white-painted face glowing from behind his phone screen. "I think we should go. It sounds fun. You just want to hold her when she gets scared in there. But in tossing the empty bag of candy at the trash can, I missed it by an inch. Come on, man, don't say that shit. My girlfriend has ears in these walls." "Fine. Then you want to hold Jason." "Please," Jason called out, invisible again behind the door. "I've been waiting for him to make a move for months." Amy snorted, then her face contorted, serious again. "When's the last time any of you actually felt freaked out on Halloween?" "It's definitely not actually scary in there," I said. I was warming up to the idea. I had always been curious, but I didn't want them to get their hopes up and then be sorely disappointed. "Kids are allowed in. Perfect for you pussies," she responded. "Let's do it. Please." "Fine." Jason emerged, his hair apparently done to his liking now. He tucked his billowy white pirate shirt into his pants. "The punch can wait a few extra minutes, I guess." By the time we got next door, it was fully dark out. A group of preteens sprinted out through the gate, nearly running into us, shoving each other and laughing uproariously. "Dude, you totally shit yourself," one of them shouted. I adjusted my bare ears. The band was far too tight, and it was already starting to give me a headache. The man who'd been guarding the gate was gone now, and people were flowing in and out freely. As we walked through it, I checked my phone, just to make sure we weren't missing anything. I frowned. It was at 10%. I could have sworn it had been fully charged before we left my house. I would have to ask Avery if I could borrow a charger. The yard was decorated with various silly things, like cheap cloth ghosts and spiders hanging from the trees. Jason pretended to scream at one of them, stumbling backwards, and Amy shoved him. "You have to get immersed. Take it seriously." The path people were meant to take was lined with caution tape. It led into my neighbor's basement, and then I assumed up through the house and back to the front door. It definitely wouldn't take us very long to get through, if that was all there was. A small chill ran up my spine as we took the steps down the basement, but I was pretty sure it was just a regular basement chill, not an especially unique one. There were real cobwebs on the railings, and I tried to avoid getting them stuck to my fuzzy outfit. As we took the last step, another cloth spider fell down from above, right in front of our faces, eyes glowing an artificial red. Seth took a small step back, and Jason laughed, poking him in the ribs. "Don't tap out already, big guy." Seth frowned, shaking his head. It startled me a little. "Shut up." There were a couple people down there, milling around. It looked like it was usually more of a storage room the rest of the year. There were shelves lined with hundreds of jars, filled with what looked to be fruits and vegetables. It was like they were preparing for the apocalypse. When I got closer, I could see that some of them had been replaced by fake eyeballs and fingers. Things like that. I bit back a smile. So cheesy. There was thumping from upstairs, and then someone shrieked playfully. I was so distracted by the sound, I didn't notice the person creeping up on us until it was too late. A man wearing a clown mask and all white jumped at us, roaring. Jason yelped and scrambled away, his hands flying out to protect himself. Amy burst into laughter. "Who's scared now?" I opened my mouth to chime in, but right then my phone rang. For some reason it sounded louder than usual, and I felt embarrassed, as if I'd left my ringer on in a movie theater. I ducked away to check it. It was my mom. My heart sunk, even though that was silly. She was probably just calling to wish me a happy Halloween. But lately I got anxious every time she called. I was always sure it must be bad news. I picked up, raising my hand to my friends as if to say 1 second. "Hi, Mom," I said cheerfully. "What's up? How are you?" There was silence on the other end for a little too long for comfort. Then I heard a strange wheezing sound. I frowned. "Mom, are you okay? Is Dad okay?" More quiet, just that strange breathing. Then I heard her speak, soft and ragged, and my blood ran cold. "Kenny." I bit the inside of my cheek. "Yes, Mom, it's Kenny. What's going on? What's going on?" I froze. Suddenly there was a lump in my throat, and I couldn't swallow. I could barely even get a breath in. This conversation felt far too familiar and far too vivid. It felt like a nightmare I had had countless times since my dad's diagnosis. It felt deeply wrong. "Mom," I said slowly, "do you know where you are right now?" Suddenly, it was like the air came back to the room, and my mother's voice rang out bright and happy like usual. "Kenny? Honey? I'm having trouble hearing you." I took a deep breath. "Sorry, Mom. I think there's a bad connection. I'm in a basement right now." "In a basement? Oh my, are you making bad decisions?" I smiled, relief washing over me. It had just been a service issue. Everything was okay. "No, Mom. I'm in a haunted house." "Scary. That sounds like fun." "It is. I can't talk long. People looking at me weird." I looked up to check if this was in fact true. But to my surprise, the basement was completely empty now. All of the people who had been exploring before were gone, including my friends. They must have gone upstairs without me. Assholes. "That's all right, honey. I just called to say Happy Halloween. Your dad and I are watching scary movies and giving out candy tonight." At the mention of my dad, I smiled. It was okay. Everyone was okay. "Good, Mom. That sounds nice." "I love you, Kenny." "I love you too. Tell Dad I say hi." "I will, baby. Talk to you soon." The line went dead. Now that I wasn't on the phone, it felt much more creepy down here, all alone. The house was completely silent. I couldn't even hear anything from upstairs anymore. I wondered for a second if my friends were planning a prank. If as soon as I got up there, they were all going to jump out at me. I rolled my eyes at the thought. The staircase was dark, save for a single orange bulb and the dim glow for what looked like a kitchen at the top. I sighed and began to climb, mentally preparing myself to be jump scared. There couldn't have been more than 10 steps, but halfway up, I started to feel confused. I had been walking for too long. I hadn't counted them, but surely I had taken more than that. After what had to be around 20 more seconds, my confusion grew. Had it really been that many more steps than I had thought? Had it been some kind of trick of the light? Right when I was about to turn around and look back down into the basement, I reached the door. Before I could step through it, it slammed shut in my face, and I fell backwards in surprise, my heart hammering in my chest. I prepared for fall, for the tumble back down the concrete steps, for my head smacking into something hard. But it didn't come. I did hit the steps, and sharp pain shot my tailbone. But I wasn't falling down. Slowly, I turned and looked behind me, and up the stairs to the kitchen door. I turned back around, and I was looking at the basement I had just been in. My mind felt like it was short-circuiting. How could that be possible? I got up, wincing and brushing myself off. "Hello? Is anyone down here?" There was no response. I moved back into the basement. Everything looked the same. Still the shelter-kin food, and the cloth spider by the door, the huge, very closed metal doors. I tried the handles. I yanked with all my strength. They wouldn't budge. There was no going back that way. I told myself this could still be a prank. Closing the doors could be, at least, everything else I just couldn't think about. Not until I got out of here. I was feeling seriously unnerved, and I just needed to find my friends and leave. Fuck the haunted house. I would much rather be in a cozy house party, drinking Jason's way too strong punch and complimenting people's costumes. I turned back the stairs, and without planning too far ahead, I sprinted up them, taking 2 steps at a time. I slammed through the door into the kitchen, almost falling flat on my face when it swung open without any protest. I was in my neighbor's kitchen. I looked around, taking it in. They had a fridge covered in magnets and a little island decorated with tiny pumpkins. It didn't seem very scary in here, but no one was here. The room was completely empty. "Jason," I called out, trying to keep the shake out of my voice. "Amy? Seth? This isn't fucking funny. Where you guys?" I took another step. As I looked around, fear flooded back in, and my hands began to tremble. It was like the second I looked away from something, it changed. I could have every detail of the pictures on the wall memorized. But as soon as I looked at something else and then back, it was different. It was like the house was warping just out corner of my eye. And I recognized what it was warping into. It was my kitchen. It was my parents' kitchen. Exactly the same as it had been the last time I had seen it. I reached out and touched the counter, as if my hand might phase right through it. Same old cold tile, vastly different from the smooth what it had been a second ago. I could hear someone talking, but their voice was far away and distant, like they were in another room. I struggled to determine whether it was real or just in my head. It sounded like my mother's voice, I realized, but that was impossible. All of this was impossible. In a basement, oh my, are you making bad decisions? Her voice was muffled through the walls, but I could just barely make out what she was saying. "Mom!" I called out and it came out weak. I sound like a child lost and scared in the supermarket. "Kenny? Honey? I'm having trouble hearing you." I swore I could just barely make someone respond to her. So quiet and so far away. It was my voice. I forced my legs to move. My eyes felt watery and my entire body was ice cold. But I took one step after another into the next room, following the sound. I opened the door into my childhood bedroom. My mother's voice was gone, leaving only heavy, complete silence. Outside of my window, beyond the windowsill lined with action figures, it was sunny and bright, too bright to see my backyard, or what would have been my backyard, had this been real. Everything was exactly how it had been when I was little, down to the color of my bed sheets, down to the lint on the carpet, and the water stain on the ceiling. My stomach twisted painfully, and I had to brace myself against the wall. So I didn't collapse. I stepped in front of my old mirror. I just needed to look at myself. I needed to see the stupid bear costume I had put on that afternoon and laugh with my friends about and entered this house wearing. I needed to understand something, anything, so I could feel grounded, so I could know I was still real. When I saw my reflection, I almost jumped out of my skin. I almost sprinted back out of the room, but I couldn't move. I didn't recognize the person looking back at me. For a moment, I thought I had been wrong. It was a door and not a mirror, but behind the man I was looking at was an inverted version of the bedroom I was standing in, an exact replica. The man was wearing my costume, but his face was wrong. I stepped closer, my knees weak. The man stepped closer too. This was me. This was me, but I didn't recognize myself. I touched my face. My reflection did too. My reflection's expression contorted into one of agonizing horror. I felt my own face scrunching up and the tears that were welling up in my eyes. In another room, I heard a knock, then 3 more. Knock, 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 knock. The way it cut through the thick silence made it sound almost deafening. Despite being far away, I turned toward the door. My reflection did too. Slowly, very slowly, I left my bedroom. I was in my parents' living room. The TV was on, like it always was, playing some kind of scary movie, but the sound must have been muted. Knock, knock, knock. Someone was knocking on the door across the room from me. It started soft, but got increasingly desperate. Someone really wanted to be let in. I just stared at my own front door. The front door from my childhood. The front door I had seen 1,000,000 times, entered and exited through 1,000,000 times. Knew like the back of my hand. The front door that I could not possibly be standing in front of right now. I finally started to cry. "Kenny." My dad's voice came from the other side, the knocking momentarily ceasing. "Kenny, are you in there?" I said nothing. Did nothing. I searched the deepest recesses of my mind for the truth, for what was really happening here, for where I was, and I realized I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember getting here. I couldn't remember who I had come here with, what we had been doing, why we had been doing it. I couldn't remember who I was. "Let me in, buddy," my dad said, His voice was broken and small. Please, I'm scared. I walked to the door. I couldn't remember deciding to do it, or telling my body to move at all. Please let me in, Kenny. Please open the door. I don't know what's going on. What's wrong with me? I reached out. My fingers touched the smooth brass doorknob. Hello? A voice came from behind me, violently snapping me out of it. It was a different voice and not a distant one, a real one, a woman's voice. I turned around. My neighbor stood in the doorway of the room that was now completely different, a room that wasn't my parents' living room, staring at me with a strange look on both of their faces. The man was holding 2 grocery bags, and the woman was holding her chest, as if I had startled her. I opened my mouth, but no sound would come out. I felt numb. I felt broken down and useless. I didn't feel human anymore. What are you doing here? The woman tried again. Goodness, sweetheart, are you okay? Did you pee yourself? I looked down. I didn't know how I hadn't noticed, but I had. My bare costume had a dark patch down one of my legs, but I couldn't really feel the warmth on my skin. I couldn't really feel anything. I dashed. I tried, but my voice broke. I tried again. The haunted house. I was with my friends, and we came after the haunted house. The woman's face changed, twisted into one of pity and confusion rather than alarm. Halloween isn't until tomorrow, sweetheart. We're not doing the haunted house yet. I shook my head, but I had no fight in me. I had no argument. Oh, was all that I could muster. The woman stepped toward me. My heart began to race again, and it felt like at this point it might just explode. Come here, sit down. I can get you some fresh clothes, okay? Who can we call? I shook my head again. I didn't want to sit down. I just want to get out of here. She was holding her hand out to me like I was a wild animal, something that might bite her if she wasn't gentle. I looked back at the door. It wasn't my front door anymore. It was the inside of one I had never seen before. Without hesitating further, I yanked it open and spilled out down the steps, the cold night air enveloping me instantly. I slammed right into Jason. My friend laughed and slammed his hand into my back, and I flinched. I couldn't breathe. My vision was blurry. I tried to look around, tried to comprehend my surroundings. We were in the yard again, and it was Halloween. The same cheesy decorations hung from the trees. There were the same children giggling and teasing each other in the street, lugging around all of their candy. Dude, we lost you in there. Are you okay? He looks like he's seen a ghost, Amy said. She was eating another lollipop. Everything came flooding back to me all at once. I don't blame you, Seth said, smiling at me, showing me his fake vampire teeth. That guy with the chainsaw was actually pretty terrifying. I'm glad we went. I didn't know what to say. Had any of it been real? Had they seriously not experienced anything that I just had? Or was this some kind of trick too? He's speechless. Amy joked, but she looked a little worried. Come on, man. Let's get to that party. A beer will fix you right up. I nodded, forcing a smile. I didn't want to tell them. I didn't know which was worse, if it really had happened or if it hadn't. I never told them what happened to me. Now it's Halloween again. I can hear the kids outside, already lined up in front of the neighbor's haunted house, eager to go in. I've been dreading this day all year, but I had been prepared. I had nearly convinced myself it was okay, that it really was just a weird hallucination or maybe some kind of joke that I was never letting on. But this morning my mom called me. I didn't pick up. Something fell off about it. And then she called me again and again. She's calling me right now as my phone is sitting on the table. And I swear I'm starting to hear knocking at the door. Story 10. I saw a grown man trick-or-treating. He came to trick me. I'm writing this in real time because I need someone to know what's happening. It's Halloween night, and something is very, very wrong. An hour ago, around 8 p.m., a man came to my door. Not a kid in a costume. A full-grown man in his 40s, wearing jeans and a black t-shirt. He was holding a pillowcase. Trick or treat, he said. I thought maybe he was joking, being ironic or whatever. I laughed nervously. Aren't you a little old for this? He didn't smile. His eyes were watery and bloodshot, and they didn't blink. Trick or treat, he repeated, expressionless, and something in his voice made my stomach twist. I just wanted him gone, so I threw a candy bar in his pillowcase. He looked down at it, then back at me. You chose treat. That's good. Most people choose trick. Then he walked away, disappearing into the dark between the streetlights. I closed the door and locked it, hands shaking. Something about him felt wrong. Not threatening exactly, but wrong in a way I can't explain. 20 minutes later, I found a Polaroid on my doorstep. I don't know how it got there. I've been watching the door the whole time. It's a photo of my house, taken from the street. Tonight, you can see my jack-o'-lanterns on the porch, still lit. I'm looking at it right now, and I don't understand how he took it, developed it, and left it on my porch in 20 minutes. Polaroids take time to develop, and I would have seen him through the window. But that's not the worst part. Update 8:47 p.m. Another photo just appeared. I'm not opening the door anymore. I'm watching through the window, and no one is coming to my porch, but photos keep showing up. This one is taken from my backyard, through my kitchen window. I can see myself in it, sitting at my table, looking at the first photo. That means he was in my yard while I was sitting here. That means he's circling my house. Update. 9:03 p.m., 4 more photos in the last 15 minutes. I'm not going outside to get them anymore, but I can see them piling up on my doorstep through the window. My hands won't stop shaking. I called the police. They said they'd send someone when they could, but it's Halloween and they're swamped with calls. Update 9:31 p.m., the photos stopped coming. I thought maybe he left. I was starting to breathe again. Then I saw it. There's a photo pressed against my living room window from the outside. He's standing right there, holding it up for me to see. It's a picture of me as a child, maybe 7 years old. I'm dressed as a pirate, opening my front door on Halloween night. And standing on the porch is a boy in a vampire costume, holding out a pillowcase. I remember this. Oh, God, I remember. I was handing out candy with my mom. This kid came to the door. He was too old, maybe 13 or 14. I was at that age where I thought being mean was funny. When he held out his bag, I didn't give him candy. I said, "Trick," and slammed the door in his face. My mom was furious, commanded me to apologize, but when she opened the door, he was already walking away. He turned back and his face was so empty, so hollow. "You chose Trick," he said. "That's okay. I'm patient." We moved away the next year. I forgot about it. That was 35 years ago. He's been waiting 35 years. Update 9:58 p.m. He's not at the window anymore. I don't know where he went. The pile of photos on my porch has grown. There must be 50 of them now. I can see them from here, and they're all of me. Me as a teenager. Me in college. Me at my wedding. Me moving into this house. He's been watching me my entire life. I tried to leave through the back door, but there are photos there too. Hundreds of them, covering my back porch. Each one a moment from my life I don't remember being photographed. Update. 10:23 p.m. I finally looked at one of the photos pressed against my window. It's of me, right now, sitting on my couch, typing this post. It was taken from inside my house, from the hallway behind me. I'm alone in this house. I checked every room, every closet, every space large enough for a person to hide. But someone took this photo from inside my house. I'm too scared to turn around right now. Update 10:45 p.m. I turn around. No one was there, but there's a Polaroid camera sitting on my hallway floor. It wasn't there before. Next to it is a pillowcase, an empty pillowcase. Update 11:11 p.m. I don't know how to explain this. I don't expect you to believe me. I looked in the mirror a few minutes ago, and my eyes looked different, watery, bloodshot, and I can't stop thinking about the houses down the street, the ones with their porch lights still on, the ones still handing out candy. I found myself walking toward my front door. I was holding the pillowcase. I don't remember picking it up. There's a house 3 doors down. I can see a family inside through the window. They have a son, maybe 7 years old. He's dressed as a pirate. I'm so hungry. Not for candy. For the trick. Final update. 11:47 p.m. I understand now. The boy I slammed the door on 35 years ago. He's not haunting me. He passed it to me. Like a disease. It's like a curse that finds a new host. I watched as my legs walked myself to that house. I rang the doorbell. The little boy answered, his parents behind him, smiling. Trick or treat. I heard myself say. He looked at me. No costume, just a grown man with a pillowcase. And he laughed. A mean little laugh. Trick, he said, and slammed the door in my face. His parents scolded him. They opened the door to apologize, but I was already walking away. I turned back and looked at him with eyes I didn't recognize anymore. You chose Trick, I said. That's okay. I'm patient. I'm in my car now, driving away from my house. I don't know where I'm going, somewhere far, but I know I'll be back in 35 years, and I know whose door I'll knock on. If a grown man ever comes to your door with a pillowcase, don't laugh. Just give him candy.